Man kicks out wife. 8 years later, she returns by private jet with triplets who look just like him. Catherine Mitchell took a deep breath as the door of the private jet opened, revealing the regional airport of Aspen. 8 years had passed since she left that town with a shattered heart and not a penny to her name. Expelled by her husband, who had unjustly accused her of infidelity. With a mix of anxiety and determination, she adjusted the belt of her elegant beige jumpsuit and firmly held the hand of one of the triplets. Behind her, the 3 identical blonde boys, dressed in impeccable black shirts, descended the stairs with the discipline she had taught them. Benjamin, Brandon, and Brody, 7 years old, were living proof of what she had come to prove, that Richard Harrington, the construction magnate and most powerful man in the region, was the biological father of children he didn't even know existed. "Mom, is this where we're going to live now?" asked Benjamin, the most curious of the 3, pointing to the mountainous landscape surrounding the small airport. "Yes, sweetheart. For now," replied Catherine, her gaze sweeping the familiar horizon with a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The driver waiting for them opened the door of the executive van and began loading the luggage. Catherine smiled politely, noticing the curious glances from the airport staff. She knew the news of her arrival would spread like wildfire through the small town before they even reached the mansion she had strategically rented next to Richard's property. The ride to the upscale part of town was quiet. Catherine watched through the window as Aspen's changes and constants passed by. The tourist town, known for its European climate and Bavarian-style buildings, seemed even more prosperous, with new shops and luxury hotels. Many of them bore the logo of Harrington Construction, the empire Richard had expanded in recent years, likely at the expense of the inheritance he had denied her in the divorce. "Look, Mom, snow!" exclaimed Brandon, pointing to an artificial snow machine on a newly opened ski slope. "It's not real snow, sweetheart. It's artificial," Catherine explained patiently, thinking about how the boys raised in New York would have to adjust to this new reality. When the car finally stopped in front of the imposing stone and timber mansion, Catherine felt a tightness in her chest. From the porch, she could clearly see the backyard of the neighboring property, Richard's house, which she had helped design in the happy early days of their marriage. "It's beautiful, Mom," said Brody, always the most sensitive of the 3, noticing the tension in his mother's expression. "Yes, it is," Catherine agreed, adjusting her thin-framed glasses and taking a deep breath. "Let's go inside, boys. We have a lot of work ahead." The housekeeper, Mrs. Edith, a woman with indigenous features and graying hair tied in a bun, greeted them at the door. Catherine had hired her over the phone, following a recommendation from her lawyer. The woman had sharp eyes that seemed to assess every detail of her new employer and the children. "Welcome, Mrs. Mitchell. The house is ready as per your instructions," the housekeeper said with a slight bow. "The children's rooms are upstairs overlooking the garden." "Thank you, Mrs. Edith. The boys must be tired from the trip. Could you show them their rooms while I check some emails?" The housekeeper nodded and guided the triplets upstairs. Catherine waited until they were out of sight before walking to the spacious back porch. From there, she observed the neighboring house, where lights were beginning to flicker on as evening fell. For a moment, she imagined Richard sitting in his office, likely unaware of the storm about to descend on his perfect life. She had planned every detail of this return. The purchase of the land where Richard intended to build his greatest venture, the transfer of the boys to the school he had helped establish, the significant donation he would make to the community hospital. Every move carefully calculated to ensure their paths would inevitably cross. Catherine didn't want reconciliation. She wanted justice. She wanted him to know that the children she had born were his, the result of the in vitro fertilization treatment that had begun when they were still married, using genetic material she had preserved for the future without his knowledge. A future he had destroyed by believing the lies of his best friend and business partner, Gregory Peterson, and throwing her out of the house on a stormy night, accusing her of betrayal. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a message from Lauren, her lawyer. "Everything's set for tomorrow, the land will be up for sale, and the Residents Association expects your presence." "Are you sure about this?" Catherine quickly typed back, "Absolutely." "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Catherine woke before sunrise. She dressed meticulously, a navy blue pantsuit that accentuated her light eyes and flattered her still impeccable figure at 38. She pulled her blonde hair into an elegant bun and applied subtle yet sophisticated makeup. As she prepared breakfast, for the boys who were still asleep, she thought about how their lives had changed over the past 8 years. After being thrown out by Richard, she had found temporary shelter at the home of an old college friend in New York. With her business degree and the little money she had managed to take with her, she began working as a consultant for small businesses. The discovery of her pregnancy came weeks later, when she was already settled in a small rented apartment. The news that she was expecting triplets nearly broke her. How would she raise 3 children alone, with no resources, and her career just beginning? For a brief moment she considered reaching out to Richard, but wounded pride and anger at the injustice stopped her. Then her life took an unexpected turn. One of her clients, impressed by her work, offered her a partnership in a fledgling logistics company. Catherine accepted the challenge, and with iron determination turned the small business into a transportation and logistics empire that now served the entire United States, with branches in Canada and Mexico. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted her thoughts. The 3 boys came down together, already dressed in the clothes she had laid out the night before. Dark pants and light shirts, their blonde hair neatly combed in identical styles. "Good morning, Mom," they said almost in unison, their sleepy little voices soft. "Good morning, my loves," Catherine replied, serving breakfast. "Today, you'll see your new school. Are you excited?" "I am," Brandon answered, always the most outgoing. "I want to know if they have robotics class like at our school in New York. I want to know if they have a good library," Benjamin added, adjusting his small reading glasses, so much like the ones Richard had worn in his youth. "What about you, Brody?" Catherine asked, noticing her 3rd son remained quiet, playing with the cereal in his bowl. "I'm a little scared, Mum," the boy admitted. "What if the other kids ask about our dad?" Catherine's heart clenched. This was a question the boys had been asking more frequently in recent months, as they noticed other children had fathers in their lives. "If they ask, you can say he lives in another city," she answered carefully. "But we'll talk about it soon, I promise." After breakfast, Catherine left the boys in Mrs. Edith's care and drove her imported car to the city center. Passing through the historic downtown, she noticed how everything seemed both familiar and strange at the same time. The chocolate shops and wine shops, the winter clothing boutiques, the upscale restaurants. Everything looked more luxurious and touristy than it had 8 years ago. She parked in front of a restored colonial mansion, which housed the Aspen Residents Association headquarters. Before getting out of the car, she checked the message she had received from her assistant in New York. "Documents for the land purchase ready for signing. Awaiting your confirmation." With steady steps, Catherine entered the building. The meeting had already begun, and several people turned to look at her when the door opened. Seated at the head of the long wooden table, Richard Harrington presided over the session. His blue eyes, identical to the triplets, widened for a second upon recognizing her, but he quickly regained his composure. "Sorry for the delay," Catherine said in a clear, firm voice. "I'm Catherine Mitchell, the new resident of Pine Ridge Manor." A murmur rippled through the room. Everyone there knew the story of the powerful Richard Harrington and his ex-wife, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago, amid rumors of infidelity. Seeing her there, elegant and clearly prosperous, was a shock. "Catherine," Richard said with calculated coolness, "what a surprise. I didn't know you were back in town." "I returned yesterday," she replied, sitting in the only empty chair, which happened to be next to a stunning young woman Catherine immediately recognized from gossip magazines, Diana Miller, the socialite engaged to Richard. "And I plan to stay for quite a while." The rest of the meeting proceeded with discussions about city projects, community events, and environmental preservation efforts. Catherine observed how Richard dominated the room with his natural authority and calculated charisma. He had put on some weight and now had streaks of grey at his temples, giving him an even more distinguished air at 45. When the discussion reached the agenda item about the new luxury complex to be built in the northern area of the city, Catherine finally spoke up. From what I understand, this land hasn't been fully acquired by Harrington Construction yet. Correct? Richard eyed her suspiciously. The negotiation is in its final stages. Why? Because I've just submitted a higher offer for the property, Catherine replied, handing a folder to the association's secretary. As you can see in the documents, my company is interested in developing an eco-tourism project on the site with lower environmental impact and greater local job creation. Richard's face paled, and a tense silence filled the room. Everyone knew that plot of land was crucial to Harrington Construction's expansion plans. This is unexpected, he said finally, his voice slightly strained. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, Catherine. Of course, she replied with a polite smile. My attorney will contact your office to schedule a meeting. When the session ended, Catherine stood quickly and left before Richard could reach her. On her way to the car, she was approached by Diana Miller, his fiancée. Catherine Mitchell, isn't it? The young woman said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Diana Miller, I believe you and Richard have some history. Catherine shook the offered hand firmly. We had history, yes, but that was a long time. He never talks about the past, Diana remarked, studying Catherine's face with curiosity. But I heard things ended, messily between you. Life is full of surprises, Miss Miller, Catherine replied, keeping her composure. Some good, some not so much. Well, I hope your return isn't uncomfortable for anyone, said Diana with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Richard and I are very happy. I'm glad for you, lied Catherine, unlocking the car. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to pick up my children from school. The mention of children made Diana raise her perfectly groomed eyebrows. Children? I didn't know you had children. I have 3, replied Catherine, getting into the car. Triplets, actually. They're 7. Without waiting for Diana's reaction, Catherine shut the door and started the engine, leaving the younger woman standing on the sidewalk with a puzzled expression. When she arrived at the Aspen Montessori School, an elite private institution Richard had helped found with generous donations, Catherine found the triplets waiting in the courtyard, surrounded by curious children and attentive teachers. How was your first day, my loves? She asked, hugging all 3. It was great, exclaimed Brandon. There's an amazing science lab, Mom. The library has more books than the one in New York, added Benjamin excitedly. I liked the music teacher, said Brody shyly. She said my drawing was really pretty. Catherine noticed an elegant middle-aged woman approaching, a curious expression on her face. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Marilyn Osborne, the school's principal, she introduced herself, extending her hand. We need to talk about your children. A chill ran through Catherine's stomach. She had expected some reaction, but not this quickly. Is there a problem? Not exactly a problem, the principal replied, lowering her voice. But we noticed an unusual resemblance between your boys and our benefactor, Mr. Harrington. Even the scholarship coordinator asked if they're related to him. How interesting, Catherine said with feigned surprise. Must be a coincidence. Of course, Kaya, the principal agreed, though she didn't seem convinced. In any case, the boys have been very well received. They're polite and well prepared. The New York school did an excellent job. Thank you. Education has always been a priority in our family. On the drive home, Catherine had to pull over when a sudden summer storm rolled in, typical of the mountain afternoons. The rain poured down the steep slopes of the town, forming small streams in the streets. Mom, look, the water's flooding that house, Brandon pointed as they passed through the lower part of town. Catherine slowed down and took in the scene. A modest house had its backyard completely submerged, and an elderly woman was trying to salvage some belongings as the water rose quickly. Let's stop, Catherine decided, parking in a safe spot. Stay in the car. Ignoring the rain soaking her elegant clothes, she ran to the house and helped the woman save some photo albums and documents. Thank you so much, dear, the woman said once they were sheltered on the porch. These photos are all I have left of my family. You shouldn't stay here. It's dangerous, Catherine warned, watching the water continue to rise. I have nowhere else to go, the old woman lamented. My son doesn't live in town anymore. and the neighbors are all busy with their own homes. Catherine didn't hesitate. Come with us then. We have plenty of space, and you can stay until the water recedes. The gratitude on the woman's wrinkled face made Catherine feel good for the first time since arriving in town. As she helped the elderly woman into the car, she noticed a familiar vehicle parked across the street, Richard's black Escalade. He watched the scene with an unreadable expression before making a quick turn and driving off in another direction. Catherine smiled to herself. The first move had been made. Now, she just had to wait for the board to adjust for the next play. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The storm worsened throughout the afternoon, turning into one of the worst Aspen had seen in years. When Catherine arrived home with the boys and the elderly woman they had rescued, she found Mrs. Edith waiting anxiously at the door. Ms. Mitchell, thank goodness you made it back safely. The news is saying several streets are blocked and some houses are being evacuated. We're fine, Edith, Catherine replied, helping the older woman inside. This is Mrs. Margaret Harrington, the woman finished to Catherine's shock. Harrington? Catherine repeated, trying to hide her surprise. I'm Richard Harrington's mother, Mrs. Margaret confirmed with a timid smile. But we haven't spoken much lately. He wanted me to move to an apartment downtown, but I prefer my little house, even with these flooding issues. Catherine felt as if fate were playing an elaborate trick on her. Of all the people she could have helped, she'd ended up rescuing the very mother-in-law she hadn't seen in 8 years. Mrs. Margaret, I'm Catherine Mitchell. I was my son's wife, the older woman finished, her eyes shining with recognition. Of course I remember you, my dear. How could I forget? You were the best thing that ever happened to my Richard. The triplets, who had been watching the scene with curiosity, stepped closer. Mom, who is this lady? Brody asked. Mrs. Margaret looked at the 3 boys with wide eyes, her mouth falling, open in surprise. Are these my grandchildren? She whispered, bringing trembling hands to her chest. Catherine hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly. Boys, this is Mrs. Margaret. She's an old friend, she explained, not wanting to confuse the children with sudden revelations. Mrs. Edith, could you prepare a warm bath for our guest and maybe some strong tea? As the boys were taken by Mrs. Edith to change out of their wet clothes, Catherine led Mrs. Margaret to the living room, where a fire crackled in the fireplace. I can't believe it, Catherine, the older woman whispered, tears in her eyes. All these years, and those boys, they look just like Richard when he was little. Mrs. Margaret, it's a long story, Catherine began hesitantly. Does Richard... Oh, the woman interrupted. No, not yet. But you came back to tell him, didn't you? Mrs. Margaret pressed, holding Catherine's hands in hers. I always knew you weren't guilty of those horrible accusations. I always defended you, but Richard was blinded by jealousy and surrounded by bad influences. Catherine felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't expected to find an ally in Richard's mother, let alone discover that she had always believed in her innocence. I came back for justice, Mrs. Margaret, not to reconcile. I understand, my dear, the woman said, wisdom in her tired eyes. Hurt is like a wound that needs time to heal. But those boys deserve to know their father, and Richard deserves to know he's a father. Just then, Catherine's phone rang. It was an emergency alert. Due to the intensity of the rain, the city was evacuating several areas, including the neighborhood where Mrs. Margaret's house was located. It seems you'll have to stay with us longer than planned, Catherine said, showing her the message. I hope you don't mind our company. On the contrary, my dear, it's like a gift from heaven to meet my grandchildren, Mrs. Margaret replied with an emotional smile, even if by chance. Night fell with the storm still raging over the city. After dinner, with the triplets already in bed, Catherine and Mrs. Margaret sat back down in the living room, each with a glass of red wine. You've done a wonderful job with them, the older woman remarked. They're polite, smart and affectionate boys. Thank you. It wasn't easy, especially at first. And your life, Catherine? I see you've done very well professionally. Catherine gave a small smile. I've been lucky, and I worked hard. My logistics company grew more than I ever imagined. Richard would be proud, Mrs. Margaret commented. I didn't come back for his pride, Mrs. Margaret, Catherine retorted, more sharply than she intended. The elderly woman nodded understandingly. Of course not, but I know my son. When he sees you like this, successful and the mother of his children, he'll realize the terrible mistake he made. Catherine took a sip of wine, thoughtful. He seems happy with his fiancée. Diana, Mrs. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. She's pretty and young, but she's not you. Richard was never the same after you left. He became harder, more closed off. We grew distant because I refused to believe the accusations against you. I'm sorry for that, Catherine said sincerely. I never wanted to come between you. It wasn't your fault, dear. It was his stubbornness and the influence of that Gregory Peterson. Hearing the name of Richard's old friend and business partner, Catherine felt her blood boil. Does Gregory still work with him? Oh yes, they're inseparable. Gregory is practically Richard's right-hand man at Harrington Construction. Though I've never trusted him, there's something in that man's eyes. Mrs. Margaret shivered slightly. The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the house phone. Catherine answered in surprise. Few people had that number. Hello? Catherine? The unmistakable male voice on the other end sent a jolt through her, even after 8 years. It's Richard. Her heart raced. How did you get this number? I'm the most influential man in this city, remember? He tried to sound casual, but tension laced his words. I'm calling because I heard my mother is at your house. Yes, she's here. Your place was flooded. I know. I stopped by and saw the damage. Thank you for helping her. It was nothing, Catherine replied coolly. She's fine and can stay as long as needed. A brief silence followed. Catherine, about earlier at the meeting, I don't understand what's happening. Why did you come back? And why are you interested in the exact piece of land I need? For my project. Business, Richard, just business. I don't believe that. After 8 years, you return to my city, rent a house next to mine, and try to buy the one property I care about. This is personal, and you know it. Catherine took a deep breath before answering. You taught me well, Richard, to treat everything as business, even feelings. We need to talk in person, he insisted. There's too much at stake. I agree. My lawyer will contact you to set something up. No, Catherine, now I'm on my way to your house. Before she could protest, he hung up. Catherine returned to the living room, where Mrs. Margaret waited with a questioning look. It was your son. He's coming here. The older woman's eyes lit up. Thank God, finally you'll talk. Mrs. Margaret, please don't mention the boys yet, Catherine urged. This isn't how I want him to find out. But my dear, please, I need to do this my way. Reluctantly, the woman agreed. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. Catherine nervously smoothed her hair before opening the door. Richard stood drenched from the rain, his dark hair plastered to his face, his blue eyes burning intensely under the porch light. For a moment, they just stared at each other, 8 years of absence heavy between them. Can I come in? He finally asked. Catherine stepped aside to let him pass. Richard entered, shaking the water off his coat, and stopped when he saw his mother sitting comfortably in the living room. Mom, are you okay? Couldn't be better, son, Mrs. Margaret replied, standing to hug him. Catherine saved me just in time. The water was already coming into the room when she showed up. Richard hugged his mother briefly, but his eyes never left Catherine. Thank you for looking after her. Like I said, it was nothing, Catherine replied, keeping her distance. She can stay here until things settle down. That won't be necessary. I've already arranged a suite at the Summit Lodge for her. It's safer. Richard, Mrs. Margaret protested, I'm not going to any hotel. I'm perfectly fine here, with Catherine and... She stopped herself before mentioning the grandchildren, casting a guilty glance at Catherine. And, Richard pressed, noticing his mother's hesitation, and with Mrs. Edith, who's been taking wonderful care of me, the older woman finished quickly. Richard looked suspiciously between the two women, sensing something was being left unsaid. We need to talk, Catherine, he said. turning to his ex-wife. "In private." "Fine," she agreed. "We can use the study." Catherine led Richard to a room, at the end of the hall furnished with dark wood and bookshelves. She closed the door behind them and gestured for him to sit in an armchair while she remained standing, keeping her distance. "So," he began, watching her intently, "you've become a successful businesswoman." "Surprised." "Impressed," he corrected, "but not surprised. You were always brilliant. I just don't understand why you decided to come back and put yourself directly in my path." Catherine crossed her arms. "Maybe because you once put yourself in mine." Richard sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "If this is about the divorce, Catherine, it's been 8 years. I thought we'd moved on." "Oh, I moved on," she replied with a cold smile. "But there's unfinished business between us, Richard." "What business? You disappeared. You didn't even show up to the divorce hearings. Your lawyer handled everything." "I had my reasons." Richard stood, closing the distance between them. "What reasons, Catherine? What could possibly be so important? That you vanished completely, only to come back 8 years later, determined to ruin my plans?" Catherine felt her heart race at his closeness. Even after all this time, Richard still had that magnetic presence that had always drawn her in. "That's something you'll find out when the time is right." A noise from the hallway interrupted the tense conversation. Catherine quickly opened the door to find Brody standing outside, his eyes wide with fear. "Mommy, I had a bad dream," the boy said, not noticing Richard behind her. Catherine crouched to his level. "It's okay, sweetheart. It was just a scary dream. Come on, I'll take you back to bed." When she turned to tell Richard they'd continue their conversation later, she found him frozen, staring at the boy. His eyes, identical to Brody's, were wide with shock and confusion. "Catherine, who is this boy?" he asked, his voice strained. "My son," she replied simply, taking Brody's hand. "We'll talk tomorrow, Richard. It's late." "No, Catherine. We need to talk now," he insisted, unable to tear his gaze from the child who looked like a miniature version of himself. "This boy, he's... Mommy?" Brody's voice trembled slightly, frightened by the intensity of the stranger's stare. "Go to your room, bro. I'll be right there," Catherine said, firmly. The boy nodded and hurried down the hall. Once he was out of sight, Richard grabbed Catherine's arm. "What the hell is going on, Catherine? That boy, he looks exactly like me when I was a kid. Just like in the pictures my mother keeps." "Let go of my arm, Richard," she ordered coldly. "We have nothing to discuss right now." "We have everything to discuss," he exclaimed, lowering his voice immediately. "That boy is my son, isn't he? Is that it? Were you pregnant when you left?" Mrs. Margaret appeared in the hallway, drawn by the raised voices. "What's going on?" she asked worriedly. "Mother, did you know about this?" Richard turned to the elderly woman. "Did you know Catherine has a son who is obviously mine?" The woman hesitated, looking at Catherine for guidance. "Richard, this is neither the time nor the place," Catherine intervened. "There are children sleeping in this house." "Children? Plural?" Richard's expression shifted from shock to disbelief. "How many?" At that exact moment, as if summoned by the tension in the air, Brandon and Benjamin appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mom, is everything okay?" "We heard loud voices," Brandon said, descending a few steps. Richard staggered back as if he'd been punched when he saw the two identical boys joining the first. "Triplets," he whispered, staring at Catherine with a mix of anger and confusion. "You had triplets and never told me?" "Boys, go back to bed," Catherine ordered firmly but gently. "Everything's fine. Mom is just talking with a co-worker." The two boys looked curiously at Richard before reluctantly obeying and heading back upstairs. "Mother, please take Richard to the living room," Catherine requested. "I'll check on the boys and be right back to talk." As Catherine went upstairs, Richard turned to his mother, still dazed. "Did you know about this? Did you know I have children?" "I only found out today, my son," Mrs. Margaret replied, guiding him back to the living room. "And it was as much a surprise to me as it is to you." "I can't believe it," Richard murmured, collapsing onto the sofa. "All this time, why did she never tell me? Why hide this from me for 8 years?" Mrs. Margaret sat beside her son, holding his hand. Richard, think about what happened. You threw her out of the house, accusing her of betrayal. You didn't give her a chance to explain, to say anything. How could you expect her to come back and tell you about the children? But she knew she was pregnant when she left. How could she deprive my children of their father? I'm sure Catherine had her reasons, the elderly woman defended, and now she's here. That's what matters. You can work this out like adults for the sake of those beautiful boys. Richard ran his hands over his face, still trying to process the revelation. They look just like me, he whispered. Unbelievable. All this time, I had 3 children and didn't know. Catherine returned to the living room, still tense, but more composed. They've gone back to sleep, she informed. Richard, I know you have a lot of questions, but this isn't the time. It's late, you're upset, and we need clear heads for this conversation. Clear heads? He repeated with a humorless laugh. You hid my children from me for 8 years, Catherine. How do you expect me to react? The same way you reacted when Gregory Peterson planted those lies about me, she replied coldly, with impulsiveness and without giving me a chance to defend myself. Richard stood, up, glaring at her. It's different. I saw the proof, Catherine. The photos, the emails. Fake proof fabricated by your dear friend. The same one who was always in love with me and couldn't stand to see us happy. What are you talking about? Gregory was always my best friend. Your best friend. Who convinced you to accuse me of betrayal without solid evidence, she countered. Your best friend who encouraged you to file for divorce immediately, with no chance for reconciliation. Your best friend who coincidentally came to me weeks later, offering comfort and saying he'd always loved me. Richard looked genuinely surprised. He came to you? Yes. And he was furious when I rejected him, even though I was alone and abandoned by you. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mrs. Margaret watched the two with concern. My dears, please, that was a long time ago. What matters now are those 3 wonderful boys upstairs who deserve to know their father. Richard took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Catherine, regardless of what happened between us, you had no right to hide my sons. 8 years, Catherine. 8 years I can never get back. And you had no right to throw me out of the house on a stormy night pregnant, without giving me a chance to defend myself. She shot back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You chose to believe lies instead of trusting the woman you claimed to love. So yes, I did what I thought was best to protect my children. Protect them from what? Their own father. From a man who didn't trust his own wife. From a man who put pride above love. From a man who would reject them at the slightest hint of doubt, just like he did with me. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. The tension between them was almost palpable. Mrs. Margaret, sensing things could escalate, stepped in. Enough for today. Both of you need to cool off. Richard, go home. Catherine, get some rest. We'll talk more calmly tomorrow. Surprisingly, they both obeyed the older woman, perhaps recognizing the wisdom in her words. You're right, Mrs. Margaret, Catherine agreed, exhausted. It's late and we have a lot to process. Richard gave a stiff nod. But this isn't over, Catherine, he warned, heading for the door. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow, and I want to meet my sons properly. They don't know you're their father, Catherine informed him, and they won't until I'm sure you won't disappear from their lives like you did from mine. I didn't disappear from your life, Richard protested. You were the one who vanished. After you threw me out, Catherine fired back. Enough, Mrs. Margaret interjected again, with surprising firmness for her age. Richard, go home. Catherine, rest. Tomorrow everything will seem clearer. With one last intense look at Catherine, Richard stepped out into the rainy night. When the door closed behind him, Catherine collapsed onto the couch, trembling. Oh, Mrs. Margaret, this isn't how I planned for him to find out. The older woman sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Plans rarely survive first. Contact, my dear, but maybe this is for the best. The truth is out, and now you can begin to deal with it. I'm afraid of what he might do, Catherine confessed. Richard has always been unpredictable when hurt, and now he has power and influence in this city. He also has 3 sons to think about, Mrs. Margaret reminded her, and despite everything, Richard has a good heart. He's made mistakes, just like you, but you both love those boys, and that should guide you now. Catherine nodded, exhausted. Tomorrow, we'll deal with everything tomorrow. But when morning came, the storm had worsened significantly. Local news reported landslides in several parts of the city, blocked roads and stranded families. The boys' school announced closures, and Catherine received a call from city officials requesting help from her logistics company to transport supplies to the hardest-hit areas. Amid the chaos of the weather emergency, her personal confrontation with Richard would have to wait. Catherine spent the day coordinating trucks and helicopters from her company to assist in rescue and supply efforts for the isolated communities. The triplets, excited about their day off from school, were helping. Mrs. Margaret and Mrs. Edith organized donations of clothes and food that had arrived at the mansion, which Catherine had turned into an impromptu collection point. It was late in the afternoon, when the rain finally let up, that the doorbell rang again. Catherine, exhausted after a day of intense work, opened the door expecting to find more volunteers with donations. Instead, she was met with Gregory Peterson. He was as elegant as she remembered, tall, with an athletic build, graying hair at his temples. That gave him a distinguished air at 46. But his green eyes held the same calculating glint she had learned to distrust. "Catherine," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "long time no see. You're even more beautiful than I remembered." "What do you want, Gregory?" she asked coldly. "Just to welcome back an old friend," he replied, trying to peer over her shoulder. "Aren't you going to invite me in? We're not friends, and this isn't a social call. Just say what you came here for." His smile faltered slightly. "Richard told me about your surprising return, and about certain even more surprising revelations. I imagine he shared everything with his loyal right-hand man," Catherine remarked dryly, as always. "He's quite shaken, as you can imagine. Finding out he has 3 children all at once isn't something that happens every day. And why are you here? To threaten me on his behalf? To try and buy me off? Or just to satisfy your curiosity?" Gregory sighed, dropping the friendly facade. "I came to offer a deal. Richard is willing to be financially generous with the children in exchange for discretion. You understand he has a reputation to uphold, a young fiancé, important projects." Catherine laughed, a humorless sound. "So that's it? He sends his little lapdog to offer money to keep his children a dirty secret? Typical." "Don't be unfair, Catherine," Gregory shot back, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Richard is just trying to handle an unexpected situation the best way he can. And the best way is to offer me money to keep hiding his children. It's a generous proposal. Backdated child support, substantial bank accounts for their education, maybe even a minority stake in Harrington Construction. In return, you go back to New York and keep visits discreet." Catherine crossed her arms. "Tell Richard my children aren't for sale. And if he wants any relationship with them, it'll be on my terms. Openly, honestly, like a real father." "You're being irrational," Gregory argued. "Think of the boys. They'd have a comfortable life, no scandals or gossip." "They already have a comfortable life. I'm a wealthy woman, Gregory. Maybe wealthier than Richard himself. I don't need his money." Gregory's expression hardened. "Careful, Catherine. You're playing with fire. Richard has a lot of influence in this town." "Are you threatening me, Gregory?" "I'm advising an old friend." "We were never friends," she retorted, "and we never will be. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Before she could close the door, Gregory forcefully held it open. "This isn't over, Catherine. Richard is furious, and when he finds out he was deceived." "Deceived?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "By who, Gregory? By me, who was faithful to him our entire marriage, or by you, who fabricated false evidence of infidelity to split us up?" For a moment, Gregory's expression wavered, revealing surprise. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, you do, and so do I. I have proof, Gregory. Proof I've kept all these years waiting for the right moment. Proof that shows exactly who set me up to separate me from Richard." It was a bluff, but by the alarmed look on Gregory's face, it had worked. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. Want to take that chance? Catherine challenged. I'm sure Richard would love to see what I found. With a sharp motion, she managed to close the door. She leaned against it, trembling slightly. The confrontation with Gregory confirmed her suspicions. He still had power over Richard and would do anything to keep them apart. As she turned, Catherine saw Mrs. Margaret standing in the hallway with a worried expression. That was Gregory, wasn't it? I recognized his voice. Yes, Catherine confirmed. He came to offer me money to take the boys away and keep everything a secret. The older woman shook her head in disappointment. That man has always been a snake. I never trusted him, not even when Richard treated him like a brother. Mrs. Margaret, I need proof of what he did in the past. He orchestrated that whole situation to separate me from Richard. I'm sure of it. If I can prove it, maybe I can help, the older woman offered, a determined glint in her eyes. When you left, I kept many of your things that Richard wanted to throw away. Documents, photos, even your old computer. They're all in my attic. Really? Catherine felt a flicker of hope. If we could recover them. With this flooding, it's impossible for now, but as soon as the waters recede, we can check if they survived. One of the triplets, Brandon, came running down the hallway. Mom, there's a huge car parking. Outside. Catherine rushed to the front window and saw a silver Escalade pulling up. Richard stepped out of the vehicle, carrying several bags. He's back, she murmured, her heart racing. Go talk to him, dear, Mrs. Margaret encouraged, and this time try to have a civil conversation, for the boy's sake. When Catherine opened the door, Richard stood on the porch, looking very different from the furious man of the night before. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his posture was less imposing. I brought some things for the boys, he said, lifting the bags. Toys, games, for the rainy day. Catherine was momentarily speechless, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, I'm sure they'll love them. Can I come in? I promise to behave better than yesterday. She hesitated, then stepped aside. The boys are in the game room. Richard entered cautiously, as if stepping onto enemy territory. Catherine, about yesterday, the way I reacted. I understand the shock, she interrupted. It wasn't how I planned for you to find out. How did you plan it then? He asked, curious. I was waiting for the right moment. I wanted us to get to know each other first, maybe on neutral ground. Richard nodded slowly. Gregory told me he spoke with you today. Catherine stiffened. Spoke is a generous word for what happened. He mentioned you refused the offer, and that you made some accusations against him. I'm not surprised he ran to defend himself. What didn't he tell you? Richard looked uncomfortable. Catherine, I know there's a lot of resentment between us, but dragging Gregory into this... He's been involved from the start, Richard, Catherine cut in, her voice hardening. He fabricated that whole story about betrayal. He planted the evidence you saw, and he's the one trying to keep us apart now. Why would he do that? Because he's always been in love with me, and because he never wanted to share your friendship or your business with anyone. Richard looked genuinely torn, caught between loyalty to his longtime friend and the doubts now surfacing. That's hard to believe, Catherine. I know. He's been your friend longer than I was your wife. But think, Richard, who benefited from our separation? Who took over half your business when I was out of the picture? Who was always there to comfort you and steer you away from any other woman who might threaten his hold over you? Her words finally seemed to strike a chord. Richard furrowed his brow, deep in thought. Let's set this aside for now, he finally said. I'm here for my children. I want to get to know them properly. Catherine hesitated, weighing the pros and cons. At last, she nodded. All right, but no revealing who you are yet. They need time to get used to you first. Richard agreed, looking both eager and nervous. How should I introduce myself then? As a family friend, someone I've known for a long time who's helping coordinate the rescue efforts. He seemed a little disappointed, but accepted. If that's how it has to be, for now. Catherine led him to the game room, where the triplets were engrossed in a gaming console. Mrs. Margaret sat in a nearby armchair watching them with obvious adoration. "Boys," Catherine called softly, "this is Mr. Harrington. He's a friend and he brought some gifts for you." The three boys turned simultaneously, their identical blue eyes fixing on Richard with curiosity. For him, it was like looking at three tiny versions of himself. The resemblance was so striking that he was momentarily speechless. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harrington," Benjamin said formally, adjusting his reading glasses. "I'm Benjamin. These are my brothers Brandon and Brody. Brandon's the oldest by 3 minutes," the boy himself announced, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "Then comes Bro, and Benji's the youngest." Richard shook their small hands, feeling an emotion he'd never experienced before. "I brought you some gifts," he said, trying to keep his voice steady as he handed over the bags. "I hope you like them." The boys eagerly opened the bags, revealing board games, books, and some electronic toys. "Wow, the new gaming console!" Brandon exclaimed in awe. "Mom said it was sold out everywhere." "I have some connections," Richard explained with a shy smile, glancing at Catherine as if seeking approval. She gave a slight nod, acknowledging the effort but still cautious. "And astronomy books." Benjamin flipped through a hardcover with obvious delight. "Look, Mom, it has real photos of all the constellations." "And an archaeology kit," Brody added, holding up a box with miniature tools. "Can I dig for dinosaurs in the garden when it stops raining?" Richard watched the scene with a mix of joy and sorrow. 8 years lost, 8 years of first steps, first words, birthdays, Christmases, moments he would never get back. "How did you know we like this stuff?" Brandon asked, always the most direct. Richard looked at Catherine, unsure how to respond. "Mr. Harrington asked me what you were into," she interjected gently. "Are you rich?" Brandon asked with the bluntness only children possess. "Do you have a big house like ours on the other side?" "Brandon," Catherine scolded, "that's not polite." "It's all right," Richard said with a smile. "Yes, I have a big house. Maybe one day you can visit." "Are there kids there?" Brody wanted to know. "Your own kids?" An awkward silence fell over the room. Richard glanced at Catherine, who looked tense. "No," he finally answered. "I don't have any other children." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning only the adults understood. Mrs. Margaret cleared her throat lightly, breaking the moment. "How about trying out that new board game?" she suggested. "It looks like fun." As the boys got absorbed in their new game, Richard moved closer to Catherine, speaking quietly. "They're amazing, Catherine. Smart, polite, curious. You've done an incredible job." "Thank you," she replied, her voice softening slightly. "It wasn't easy, especially at first. I can imagine. 3 babies at once, and premature no less. They spent a month in the NICU." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, guilt weighing heavily on him. "And I wasn't there to help." "You weren't because you didn't know," Catherine conceded, surprising herself with the conciliatory tone. "And maybe I should have found a way to tell you, no matter what had happened between us." It was her first admission of fault, and Richard seemed to appreciate it. "Can we try to make things right now?" he asked, sincerity in his voice. "For their sake, if not for ours." Catherine looked at their children, laughing as they played with Mrs. Margaret. They deserved to know their father no matter what had happened in the past. "We can try," she agreed cautiously. "But it'll take time, Richard, a lot of time." "I have all the time in the world for them," he assured her, genuine emotion in his voice, "and to make up for my mistakes." Just then, one of Catherine's rescue team members hurried into the room. "Ms. Mitchell, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Several families are stranded in the northern region, and the water levels are rising fast. We need authorization to deploy the helicopters." Catherine immediately shifted into professional mode. "Of course. Get the teams ready. I'll be in the office in 5 minutes to coordinate." As the staff member left, she turned to Richard. "I need to handle this. Can you stay with the boys for now? Mrs. Margaret will be here, and Mrs. Edith too." Richard looked surprised and touched by the trust she was showing. "Of course. I'll stay as long as needed." Catherine nodded and quickly left, leaving Richard with his mother and the sons he barely knew. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. Beneath all the hurt and resentment, there was still that spark of trust that had once bound them together. While coordinating rescue efforts from her makeshift office, Catherine couldn't help but reflect on how drastically her life had changed in just 2 days. Her original plan of slow, calculated revenge was quickly being replaced by something more complicated, the faint possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation. But there were still many obstacles ahead. Gregory, with his influence over Richard, and his dark secrets. Richard's young fiancée, who certainly wouldn't accept being replaced so easily. And most importantly, the broken trust between them, which would need to be rebuilt slowly, like a bridge over turbulent waters. The future was as uncertain as the stormy skies over Aspen, but for the first time in 8 years, Catherine allowed herself to glimpse a ray of hope. The night was long and exhausting for Catherine. As she coordinated rescue efforts by phone and computer, her mind was torn between the weather emergency ravaging Aspen and the personal drama unfolding under her own roof. Richard, the man who had thrown her out of their home 8 years ago, was now in the game room, getting to know the children he hadn't even known existed until the night before. By the time she managed to resolve the most urgent matters, it was well past midnight. Catherine stepped out of the makeshift office and quietly walked to the living room. What she saw made her pause in the doorway. Richard was asleep on the large sofa, with Brody curled up beside him. A pile of storybooks and board games scattered across the floor told the story of how they'd spent the evening. "He insisted on waiting for you to finish work, Mrs. Margaret said softly from her knitting chair nearby. The other two went to bed, but Brody didn't want to leave his new friend. Catherine felt a lump in her throat. Brody, always the most sensitive and introverted of the triplets, rarely warmed up to strangers so easily. "Did they can't get along?" she asked quietly, as if they'd always known each other. The elderly woman replied with a serene smile. "It's incredible how blood recognizes blood, even unknowingly." Catherine moved closer to the couch, watching father and son asleep. The resemblance between them was striking, the same face shape, the same expressive eyebrows, even the way they slept with a hand under their cheek was identical. She reached out to wake Brody, but Richard opened his eyes at that moment. "Sorry," he whispered, trying not to wake the child. "I think we dozed off waiting for you." "It's fine. I'll take him to bed," Catherine replied carefully, lifting her son into her arms. Brody murmured something unintelligible but didn't fully wake. She carried him upstairs, feeling Richard's gaze following her. When she returned to the living room, Mrs. Margaret had already retired to her room, leaving them alone. "They're wonderful children, Catherine," Richard said, now fully awake. "Brandon challenged me to 3 chess matches and won them all. Benjamin impressed me with his knowledge of astronomy. And Brody's, he has an incredible sensitivity to music." "Yes," Catherine agreed, sitting in an armchair, keeping a safe distance. "Brandon has always been competitive like you. Benjamin is the intellectual of the family, and Brody is the artist. You've done an amazing job raising them," Richard acknowledged, sincerity in his voice. "I don't know if I could have done it alone. I didn't have a choice," she replied simply. A heavy silence settled between them, laden with unasked questions and unresolved hurts. "How's the situation in the city?" Richard finally asked, breaking the silence. "Critical. Several families are isolated and forecasts predict more rain overnight. But we're managing to reach the worst-hit areas with helicopters." "What you've done is admirable, Catherine, building a company like yours from scratch in such a short time." "I was lucky and had good partners," she answered, unable to suppress a hint of pride in her voice. "It wasn't luck," Richard countered. "It was skill. The same skill I always saw in you even when we were young." Catherine felt her heart race at the unexpected compliment. For a moment, she saw in him the man she'd fallen for. Before, Gregory's power and influence changed him. "It's late," she said abruptly, standing up. "You should go home. Your fiancé must be worried." The mention of Diana seemed to bring Richard back to reality. "Yes, of course," he agreed, rising as well. Can I come back tomorrow to see the boys?" Catherine hesitated for only a second. "Of course, but still as a family friend. I'm not ready to tell them you're their father yet." Richard nodded, understanding. one step at a time. As he headed to the door, Catherine called out, "Richard?" He turned, hopeful. "Thank you for staying with them tonight," she said, softer than she'd intended. It meant a lot, especially to Brody. "Don't thank me," he replied, with a sad smile. "I'm just trying to make up for some lost time." After Richard left, Catherine went upstairs to check on the boys. They were all fast asleep, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Sitting on the edge of Brody's bed, stroking his blonde hair so much like his father's, Catherine allowed herself to cry silently. The tears she'd held back for 8 years finally found their way, tears of hurt, relief, hope, and fear of the future. The next morning, the rain had let up, allowing the sun to peek timidly through the clouds. Schools remained closed, but rescue teams could now reach previously isolated areas. Catherine prepared breakfast while the triplets chatted excitedly about the previous night's events. "Mr. Harrington said he's going to teach me how to play golf," Brandon exclaimed excitedly, biting into a piece of toast. "He has a private course at his house. And he promised to show me his professional telescope," Benjamin added. "He said you can see Jupiter's moons." Brody, quieter as usual, just smiled while sketching something in his notebook. "What are you drawing?" "Bro?" Catherine asked, pouring orange juice. "Mr. Harrington and me," the boy replied, showing a drawing of 2 figures, one large and one small, playing the piano together. Catherine felt her heart tighten. It was incredible how, in just one night, Richard had managed to form such a strong bond with the boys. Part of her was happy for them, but another part feared what might happen if he decided to disappear from their lives again. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Lauren, her lawyer in New York. "Catherine, we have a problem," she said bluntly. "Someone is looking into your medical records from the IVF procedure." A chill ran down Catherine's spine. "What do you mean? Who?" "I'm not sure. A private investigator tried to access the files from the clinic where you had the procedure. Luckily, the director is a friend of mine and alerted me." "It must be Richard," Catherine concluded, stepping away so the boys wouldn't hear. "He just found out about the triplets yesterday." "So soon? I thought you planned to ease him into..." "Just things got out of hand, but don't worry, we're talking civilly." "Are you sure? Because digging into your medical records doesn't sound like someone who wants to talk civilly." Catherine frowned, worried. "You're right. I'll confront him about it." After hanging up, Catherine tried to make sense of it. If Richard wanted to prove paternity, why not just ask for a DNA test? Why investigate the fertility clinic's records? The answer came in the form of another call, this time from an unknown number. "Catherine Mitchell," she answered, as professional as ever. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The woman's voice on the other end sounded nervous. "This is Jennifer Parker. I worked for you 8 years ago as a housekeeper." Catherine nearly dropped the phone. Jennifer had been the key witness against her in the divorce, claiming she'd seen Catherine with another man in the house while Richard was away. "Jennifer, what do you want after all this time?" "I need to talk to you. It's important about what happened back then." Catherine's heart raced. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone," Jennifer insisted. "Can we meet today? It's really urgent." After arranging to meet at a cafe in the lower part of town, Catherine hung up, her mind buzzing with questions. Why did Jennifer want to talk now after so long? Was it a trap? Or had she finally decided to tell the truth about her false testimony? Needing to leave for the meeting, Catherine asked Mrs. Margaret to watch the boys. Just as she was about to leave, the doorbell rang. It was Richard, carrying more gifts for the triplets and a breakfast basket for the adults. "I thought I'd have lunch with you all today," he said, looking more relaxed than the day before. "If that's all right." "Actually, I'm on my way out," Catherine replied, grabbing her car keys. "I have an important appointment, but Mrs. Margaret is here with the boys, and you're welcome to stay." Richard seemed slightly disappointed, but nodded. "Is something wrong? You seem tense." Catherine hesitated. Should she tell him about Jennifer's call? About the medical records investigation? She decided to keep it to herself for now. "Just a business meeting," she lied, "about the rescue efforts." "I see. Catherine, about yesterday. Thank you for trusting me with the boys." She gave a faint smile. "They really liked you. Especially..." "Brody!" Richard's face lit up. He's a special boy, they all are. Yes, they are, agreed Catherine, walking past him toward the door. I'll be back for dinner. If you need anything, Mrs. Edith will be in the kitchen. As she drove toward downtown, Catherine tried to organize her thoughts. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. If Jennifer confessed that she had lied under Gregory's direction, and if she could recover the documents Mrs. Margaret had kept, maybe she could finally prove to Richard how he had been manipulated. The cafe she had chosen for the meeting was small and discreet, mostly frequented by locals rather than tourists. Catherine arrived a few minutes early and picked a table in the back where she could watch the entrance. Jennifer arrived right on time. She looked older and exhausted, with deep dark circles and graying hair. When she saw Catherine, she hesitated, for a moment at the door as if considering running away, but then took a deep breath and approached. "Mrs. Mitchell," she greeted, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming." "Sit down, Jennifer," Catherine replied, keeping her tone neutral despite the whirlwind of emotions she felt seeing the woman who had helped destroy her marriage. After ordering coffee, Jennifer began to speak, nervously twisting her paper napkin in her hands. I need to confess something about what happened 8 years ago, about my testimony in the divorce proceedings." Catherine remained silent, letting her continue. "What I said about seeing you with another man at the house, it was a lie," Jennifer admitted, tears in her eyes. "I was paid to say that, and threatened if I didn't cooperate." Though she had always suspected it, hearing the direct confession hit Catherine hard. Her throat tightened. "Who paid you, Jennifer?" "Mr. Gregory Peterson. He offered me enough money to pay for my son's treatment. He was sick at the time, and he said if I didn't cooperate, he'd make sure none of the wealthy employers in town would ever hire me again." Catherine nodded slowly, anger growing inside her. "And why are you telling me this now, after so long?" Jennifer lowered her, eyes ashamed. "My son passed away 3 months ago, Mrs. Mitchell. The money I got wasn't enough to save him, and I've lived all these years with this guilt. When I heard you'd come back to town, I felt it was a sign that I needed to tell the truth before it was too late for me, too." Despite everything, Catherine felt compassion for her. "I'm so sorry about your son, Jennifer." "I'm sorry for what I did to you," Jennifer replied, openly crying now. "Mr. Gregory told me exactly what to say, down to the smallest details, of what your supposed lover would look like. We made up the whole story together, rehearsed it over and over before the testimony." "And Richard never suspected?" "Mr. Harrington was blinded by jealousy back then. Mr. Gregory had been planting suspicions in his head for months, saying he'd seen you talking too much with other men at events, insinuating things. My testimony was just the final straw." Catherine felt sick. The manipulation had been even more elaborate than she'd imagined. "Jennifer, would you be willing to make a formal statement about this? A written testimony?" The woman hesitated, fear visible in her eyes. "Mr. Gregory is very powerful, Mrs. Mitchell. He could hurt me." "I'll protect you," Catherine assured her. "My company has far more resources than Richard's construction business. I can offer you a job in New York, a fresh start far from here." The offer seemed to spark a glimmer of hope in Jennifer's tired eyes. "You'd do that for me? After what I did?" "Everyone deserves a second chance, Jennifer. And your confession means a lot to me." After finalizing the details of the formal statement, which would be recorded at Catherine Mitchell's lawyer's office the next day, the two women parted ways. Catherine returned to her car feeling both vindicated and unsettled. She now had the first concrete proof of Gregory's betrayal, but it only scratched the surface of the manipulation he had orchestrated. As she started the engine, her phone rang, again. It was Mrs. Margaret, her voice tense and worried. "Catherine, you need to come home right now." "What happened? Are the boys okay?" "Yes, they are, but Richard and Gregory are here, and the situation is tense. Gregory showed up uninvited and found Richard playing with the triplets. They're arguing in the study now." Catherine pressed the accelerator, her heart pounding. "I'm on my way. Please don't leave the boys alone with Gregory." "Don't worry. Mrs. Edith took them to the backyard. But hurry, dear. I'm afraid of what Gregory might do." Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now back to the story. Catherine sped through the still partially flooded streets of Aspen, her mind racing. Gregory must have found out Richard was getting close to the triplets and decided to interfere. What was he telling Richard now? What lies was he spinning to keep them apart? When she finally arrived home, she found Mrs. Margaret at the door, visibly anxious. "Thank goodness you're here. They've been in the study for almost an hour and the voices keep getting louder." Catherine handed her purse and coat to the older woman and strode determinedly toward the study. She could hear the raised voices even before opening the door. "You're being manipulated, Richard," Gregory was saying. "Can't you see she planned all this, coming back right now just as we're about to close the biggest deal in Harrington construction? Showing up with 3 kids who conveniently look like you. It's obvious she wants money." "You haven't seen them, Gregory," Richard countered, his voice strained. "The resemblance is uncanny. There's no denying they're my sons." "There's plastic surgery, Richard. Digital photo manipulation. 1,000 ways to create that illusion." Catherine flung the door open, cutting off the argument. Both men turned to her, Richard looking distraught, Gregory barely masking his fury. "Glad you could join us, Catherine," Gregory said with false warmth. "We were just discussing your extortion scheme." "There is no extortion, Gregory," she replied coldly. "And since you weren't invited to this house, I'll ask you to leave." "Richard invited me," he shot back with a venomous smile, "as his lawyer and friend, to discuss the legal implications of this whole situation." "That's not exactly how it happened," Richard corrected, shifting uncomfortably. "Gregory showed up while I was with the boys and insisted on talking." "And I'm glad I did," Gregory continued, ignoring the remark. "Someone has to protect you from yourself, Richard. This woman left you pregnant, hid your so-called children for 8 years, and now conveniently reappears just as you're about to get married and finalize the project that will transform the company." Catherine stayed calm, knowing losing her temper would only give Gregory ammunition. "Richard, I just met with Jennifer Parker," she said, watching with satisfaction as Gregory's face paled. "Remember her? Our old maid who testified in the divorce case?" "Of course I remember," Richard replied, confused by the sudden shift. "What about her?" "She confessed to lying in her testimony." "Who was paid and coerced by Gregory to fabricate the story about my supposed lover?" Richard turned to his friend, who had momentarily lost his composure. "Is this true, Gregory?" "Of course not," he exclaimed, quickly recovering. "It's just another one of her lies. She probably paid the woman to say this now." "Jennifer will give a formal statement tomorrow," continued Catherine, unshaken. "And I have a team investigating other irregularities from that time. I believe we'll find more evidence of your interference in our marriage, Gregory." The man let out a forced laugh. "This is ridiculous. Richard, are you really going to believe her after everything?" Richard seemed genuinely confused, looking between the two as if he didn't know whom to trust. "Why, Gregory?" asked Catherine, stepping closer to him. "Why destroy our marriage out of jealousy? To control Richard's business, or both?" "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, but a nervous twitch in his left eye betrayed him. "You do," she insisted. "You always have. You never wanted Richard to be happy with me. From the beginning, you sabotaged our relationship with little hints, planted doubts, malicious comments. And when none of that worked, you fabricated evidence to tear us apart for good." Richard looked increasingly disturbed. "Gregory, answer. Hami, is this true?" Instead of responding directly, Gregory tried to shift tactics. "What matters is now, Richard. And right now, this woman is trying to ruin your life again. Think of Diana, your reputation, your future." "My future is tied to my children, no matter who they're with," Richard replied with a firmness that surprised Catherine. "If they're truly mine, as I believe they are, nothing else matters." "You can't be serious," Gregory exclaimed, losing control. "You're going to throw everything away over some well-crafted lie? Diana is young. She can give you legitimate children. Children you'll watch grow from the start, not these kids who appeared out of nowhere." "Enough, Gregory," Richard interrupted, anger finally surfacing. "Those boys have names. They're Benjamin, Brandon, and Brody, and until proven otherwise, they're my sons." Gregory looked at Richard, with a mix of disbelief and contempt. "You're weaker than I thought," he said finally. "Always have been. That's why you needed me all these years, to make the tough decisions you couldn't. Get out of my house," Catherine ordered calmly but firmly. "Now." Gregory adjusted his jacket with forced dignity. "This isn't over, not for either of you," he threatened, heading for the door. "And when you realize your mistake, Richard, maybe I'll still be willing to help. But don't count on it." When the door closed behind him, Richard collapsed into a chair, looking exhausted. "All these years," he murmured, running his hands over his face. "Was I really that blind?" Catherine sat across from him, keeping a respectful distance. "Love and trust can blind us, Richard. It took me a while to see the influence Gregory had over you, over us. If what Jennifer said is true, if Gregory really set everything up—" "He did," Catherine confirmed softly. "And it wasn't just with Jennifer. Those photos you saw, the emails, all of it was fabricated." Richard looked up at her, pain and guilt evident. "How can you be sure?" "Because I never betrayed you, Richard. Not once. Not even in thought. Despite your jealousy, the constant business trips, the nights I spent alone while you and Gregory worked late, I was always faithful." A tear rolled down Richard's face, and he made no effort to hide it. "Forgive me, Catherine, for doubting you, for sending you away, for all these lost years." Catherine felt such a strong wave of emotion that she had to take a deep breath to steady herself. "There's still much to be clarified, Richard, many wounds to heal." "I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes," he replied, extending his hand across the table in a gesture of reconciliation. After a moment of hesitation, Catherine accepted the gesture, briefly placing her hand on his. "Let's take it one step at a time, for the boys' sake." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Brandon, his usually confident face now showing concern. "Mom, is everything okay?" "We saw the angry man leaving." Catherine smiled reassuringly at her son. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just a work discussion." Brandon stepped into the office, closely followed by his brothers. The three boys looked curiously at Richard, who discreetly wiped away tears. "Mr. Harrington, will you stay for dinner?" Benjamin asked politely. "Mrs. Edith is making lasagna." "If your mother allows it," Richard replied, looking at Catherine. "Of course," she agreed. "It'll be nice." Dinner unfolded in a surprisingly pleasant atmosphere. The triplets dominated the conversation with stories about their school in New York, their friends, and their favorite activities. Richard listened with evident fascination, absorbing every detail of the life he had missed. "And when Mom said we were moving to Aspen, we got super excited," Brandon shared. "Especially because she said it snows here in winter." "It doesn't always snow, but when it does, it's truly beautiful," Richard commented with a smile. "When I was a kid, I built a snowman right in the middle of Central Plaza." "Can we make one too?" Brody asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Of course," Richard promised. "Next snowfall, we'll build the biggest snowman this town has ever seen." Catherine watched the interaction with mixed feelings. It was clear Richard would be a wonderful father, attentive and devoted. But how long would this enthusiasm last? And what would happen when Gregory inevitably retaliated, as he surely would? After dinner, while Mrs. Margaret took the boys to get ready for bed, Catherine and Richard were left alone on the porch, watching the starry night that had replaced the storm clouds. "What happens now?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "What do you mean? With the boys? With me? With us?" Catherine took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "As for the boys, I need to tell them who you are, but I want to do it slowly, carefully. They've always asked about their father, but lately their curiosity has grown." "I understand. When do you think would be the right time?" "Maybe once we're absolutely certain," Catherine suggested. "A formal DNA test could—" "We don't need that," Richard interrupted. "Not for me, at least. I know. They're my sons, just look at them." "Yes, but for legal matters, for their future, it would be better to have proper documentation." Richard nodded in understanding. "You're right, as always. I'll schedule the test as soon as possible." "And what about Diana?" Catherine asked, unable to resist the question that had been bothering her. Your fiancée? How is she handling all this? Richard seemed uncomfortable. I haven't told her all the details yet. She knows you're back, and that there are complications from the past we need to resolve. But she doesn't know about the boys. Catherine raised her eyebrows, surprised. Don't you think she should? You're about to marry her after all. It's complicated, Richard admitted, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture Catherine knew well. Diana is different from you, younger, more fickle, Catherine suggested, unable to resist a hint of irony. That's not what I was going to say, Richard protested. But she has specific expectations about how our life will be after marriage, and kids weren't part of the immediate plan. Thus, I see. Well, that's something you'll need to work out. If you plan to have a relationship with the boys, Diana will have to accept them too. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Honestly. As he prepared to leave, the triplets came running down the stairs to say goodbye, already dressed in their matching pajamas. Are you coming back tomorrow? Asked Brody, tugging at Richard's coat sleeve. Of course, Ben, he promised, crouching to their level, and I have a surprise for you. What is it? The three asked in unison, eyes shining with excitement. If I tell you, it won't be a surprise, will it? Richard teased, ruffling Brandon's hair affectionately. But I can say it involves horses. Horses! Tom Brandon exclaimed, always the most enthusiastic about adventures. Are we going riding? If your mum says yes, Richard replied, glancing at Catherine. We'll see, she said, trying to sound stern but unable to suppress a small smile at her son's excitement. After Richard left, Catherine put the boys to bed, patiently answering their endless questions about horses, ranches, and the new friend who had entered their lives so suddenly. Mum, why does Mr. Harrington look so much like us? Asked Benjamin, always the most observant of the three. He has blue eyes like ours and the same eyebrows. Catherine hesitated, feeling the moment was coming faster than she'd planned. Sometimes people who aren't related can look alike, Benji, she answered carefully. It's just a coincidence. Mrs. Margaret says she doesn't believe in coincidences. Brody chimed in innocently. She says it's blood recognizing blood. Catherine made a mental note to have a word with Mrs. Margaret about what she told the boys. Bedtime, guys. We'll talk more tomorrow. When she finally retreated to her own room, Catherine was emotionally drained. The encounter with Jennifer, the confrontation with Gregory, the growing closeness with Richard, the boys' increasingly pointed questions. It was too much to process at once. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. An unknown number. Hello, Catherine, it's Diana Miller. Catherine sat up in bed, surprised to hear Richard's fiancée's voice. Diana, how did you get my number? I have my ways, the younger woman replied curtly. We need to talk. Tomorrow at noon at the Summit Lodge's restaurant. It's important. About what? About Richard. About your sons. About our future. Catherine hesitated. Meeting Diana could complicate things further. On the other hand, the woman deserved to know the truth, especially if Richard was hesitating to tell her. I'll be there, she finally agreed. Come alone, Diana instructed before hanging up. Catherine lay back staring at the ceiling, sleep now impossible. What did Diana want? To confront her, threaten her, or simply understand? What was happening with the man she planned to marry? The next morning, Catherine woke early after a restless night. The rains had completely stopped, and the sun shone brightly in the aspen sky, as if announcing a new beginning. As she prepared breakfast, she got a text from Richard. Test scheduled for today at 2 p.m. GeneTech Labs. Can we talk before? Catherine replied yes without mentioning her meeting with Diana. She needed to understand what the younger woman wanted before telling Richard. After leaving the boys in the care of Mrs. Margaret and Mrs. Edith, who planned a baking session, to keep them entertained, Catherine drove to the Summit Lodge, one of Aspen's most luxurious hotels. The restaurant was located on a deck with a mountain view, and Catherine had no trouble spotting Diana, sitting alone at a secluded table, wearing an elegant red outfit that contrasted with her tanned skin. Thank you for coming, the young woman said as Catherine approached. Please have a seat. Catherine obliged, studying the woman in front of her. Diana must have been around 30, stunning, With dark hair and expressive brown eyes, she exuded confidence and sophistication, but there was something vulnerable in her posture that surprised Catherine. "So," Diana began after the waiter took their orders, "you're the famous Catherine, the first wife, the one who left and shattered Richard." "Things are a bit more complicated than that," Catherine replied calmly. "But yes, I'm Catherine." Diana studied her curiously. "You're nothing. Like I imagined," she admitted. "Richard rarely talks about you, but when he does, he seems different, as if part of him is still stuck in the past." Catherine didn't know how to respond to that, so she remained silent. "I'll be direct," Diana continued, leaning forward. "I know your children are Richard's. The resemblance is undeniable, and besides, Gregory told me." "Gregory?" Catherine couldn't hide her surprise. "Yes, he came to see me last night, very concerned. Said Richard was being manipulated, that you'd come back to extort him using children who may or may not be his." Catherine sighed. Of course, Gregory would try to use Diana in his scheme. "And you believed him?" Diana gave a bitter smile. "Not entirely. Gregory's always had his own agenda, especially when it comes to Richard. But I can't deny I'm unsettled by the situation." "Understandable," Catherine conceded. "No one would want to find out their fiancé has 3 children from a past relationship, especially so suddenly." "It's not just that," Diana admitted, taking a sip of water. "It's how Richard's changed since you came back. He's distant, preoccupied, cancels plans, disappears for hours, and when he's with me, his mind is somewhere else." Catherine felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the young woman. "Diana, I didn't come here to interfere in your relationship with Richard. I returned for other reasons, and the boys deserve to know their father, but I have no intention of winning him back." Diana interrupted with a short laugh. "Maybe not intentionally, but your presence is still affecting everything." The waiter brought their drinks, creating a pause in the tense conversation. "What do you want from me, Diana?" Catherine finally asked. "Why did you call me here?" The young woman took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "I want to know if you still love him." The question caught Catherine off guard. It was too direct, too personal, for a conversation between 2 near strangers. And worst of all, she didn't know how to answer honestly. "What I feel for Richard is complicated," she replied at last. "There's too much history, too much hurt, too many misunderstandings between us. But we have 3 children together, which creates a permanent bond, whether we like it or not." "That doesn't answer my question," Diana pressed. "No, it doesn't," Catherine agreed. "Because honestly, I don't know the answer. Part of me will always care for him, as the father of my children. Another part will never forget how he cast me out, how he doubted me. It's complicated." Diana studied Catherine's face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in her eyes. "You know, when I first started dating Richard, everyone warned me," she confessed. "They said he was still stuck in the past, that he'd never fully gotten over his divorce. I didn't listen. I thought I could make him forget, that I could be the fresh start he needed." "And you were, I imagine," Catherine replied gently. "Richard seems happy with you. He's about to get married." "We were," corrected Diana. "The wedding was postponed indefinitely last night. Richard said we needed to reassess the situation, in light of recent events." She made air quotes, mimicking Richard's formal tone. Catherine felt the impact of the news, but tried not to show it. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Diana replied with surprising dignity. "If he can postpone our wedding so easily at the first complication, maybe he's not the man I should marry." "Richard is in a tough spot," Catherine defended, surprised at herself for taking his side. "Finding out he has 3 children all at once isn't easy." "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Diana reflected, with a wisdom Catherine hadn't expected. "There will always be something more important than us. For you, it was his business, the constant travel, the late nights with Gregory. For me, it'll be this: children he doesn't even know, an ex-wife who reappears, a past that was never really resolved." Catherine didn't know what to say. Deep down, Diana was right. Richard had always put other priorities above his relationships. "What do you plan to do?" she finally asked. Diana gave a sad smile. What any woman with a shred of self-respect would do. Take a step back and let him sort out his problems. If in the end he still wants to marry me, great. If not, she left, the sentence hanging, shrugging elegantly. You're stronger than you seem, Catherine observed. And you're more honest than I expected, Diana countered. I came prepared to hate you, the manipulative ex-wife returning from the past to ruin my relationship. And now? Now I see we're just two women who got involved with the same complicated man at different points in our lives. The two shared a moment of mutual understanding, an unexpected connection born from shared experience. So what happens next? Catherine asked. That depends on Richard, I suppose, Diana replied, finishing her drink. And on you, too. And on those 3 adorable boys who look just like him. You've met them? Not yet. But I've seen photos. Gregory showed me, thinking it would make me furious. It had the opposite effect, she admitted with a small smile. They're beautiful children, and it's obvious they're his. The conversation was interrupted by Catherine's phone, ringing insistently. It was Mrs. Margaret, her voice alarmed. Catherine, Brody is missing. What do you mean missing? Catherine asked, standing abruptly, her heart racing. We were in the garden. He went inside to get something from his room, and when we checked, he was gone. Brandon said he mentioned something about looking for his father. Oh my God, Catherine exclaimed, grabbing her purse hastily. Did you call Richard? Yes, he's on his way to our house. We're also searching the neighborhood, but with all the tourist activity after the storm. I'm coming. Catherine hung up, turning to Diana, who watched with concern. I have to go. One of my sons is missing. What happened? Diana asked, standing as well. Brody disappeared. Apparently he went looking for Richard, Catherine explained quickly, already heading for the exit. I'll come with you, Diana decided immediately. 2 cars, 4 eyes searching, it'll be more efficient. Catherine hesitated for only a second, then nodded, grateful for the unexpected offer. Thank you. The 2 women hurried out of the restaurant, united by a shared concern that outweighed any past rivalry. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The heart of Aspen buzzed with activity. After days of heavy rain, tourists and residents took advantage of the sunshine to fill the streets, crowding shops, restaurants, and parks. Little Brody, with his 7 years and angelic features, could have been anywhere in that sea of people. Catherine drove quickly, her eyes scanning for any sign of her son, her heart tight with worry. Diana followed in her own car a few yards behind, equally vigilant. When they arrived at the mansion, they found Richard already coordinating the search with some employees from Harrington Construction he had called in to help. Any news? Catherine asked, rushing to him. Nothing yet, Richard replied, his face tense with concern. We've checked every room in the house, the garden, the entire property. Brandon said Brody mentioned wanting to surprise me with something about a drawing he made. He must have decided to go to your house, Catherine concluded, running her hands nervously through her hair. But how? It's too far to walk, and He might have hitched a ride with someone, Richard suggested, his voice heavy with worry. A service worker, a delivery person. Catherine paled at the possibility. Oh my God, Richard! What if... We'll find him, he assured her, gripping her hands firmly. I've already alerted all my contacts in town, including the municipal guard. We'll find him, Catherine. Just then, Diana approached, having parked her car. Richard, she greeted curtly before turning to Catherine. I spoke to some tourists near the property entrance. A family said they saw a blonde boy alone heading towards Central Park about half an hour ago. The park, Catherine exclaimed. Of course. Brody's always wanted to see the gazebo from the town's postcards. Let's go, Richard decided, already heading to the car. Catherine, come with me. Diana, can you keep searching here with the others? Diana nodded, exchanging a quick glance with Catherine. There was an unspoken understanding between the 2 women, a momentary truce in the face of the emergency. On the way to the park, Catherine and Richard barely spoke, both too tense with worry. The town was unusually busy, with tourists enjoying the sun after days of rain, making it hard to navigate the car and see clearly. "There's the park," Richard pointed out, parking as close as possible. "Let's split up to cover more ground." Aspen Central Park was filled with families, couples, and groups of tourists. The gazebo, a Bavarian-style structure in the center, was surrounded by people taking photos. Catherine and Richard anxiously scanned every corner, asking everyone if they'd seen a blonde 7-year-old boy in a blue shirt and jeans. It was Richard who spotted him first, a small figure sitting alone on a bench in a secluded spot, head down, shoulders slumped in obvious dejection. Brody was holding something in his little hands, what looked like a folded piece of paper. "Catherine," Richard called, pointing. "Over there." Catherine ran in the direction he indicated, relief flooding her chest as she recognized her son. Brody looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps, his little face lighting up when he saw his mother and Richard. "Mommy!" he exclaimed, running into her arms. "I got lost!" Catherine hugged him tightly, tears finally spilling over. "Don't ever do that again, Brody. Never wander off like that. We were all terrified." "Sorry, Mommy," the boy murmured, crying. 2. "I just wanted to show Mr. Harrington my drawing as a surprise." Richard knelt beside them, his expression a mix of relief and emotion. "What drawing, bro?" he asked gently. The boy held out the crumpled, tear-stained paper. It was supposed to be a drawing of our family, you, me, Mommy, Brandon, and Benji. But then I got lost, and it started raining again, and the drawing got all wet. Richard took the paper carefully. Even though it was damaged by the rain, he could still make out 5 figures holding hands. 3 small ones, 2 larger ones. Above them, in colorful, childlike letters, it read, "My family." "This is the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen, bro," said Richard, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "Did you really like it?" the boy asked, wiping his tears with his shirt sleeve. "Even though it's all ruined?" "I loved it more." "Then I can explain," Richard answered sincerely. "But next time you want to give me a gift, ask your mom to call me, okay? No more adventures alone." Brody nodded solemnly, still clinging to his mother. "I promise." Catherine watched the interaction with a racing heart. Brody's drawing confirmed what she already suspected. The boys were forming a bond with Richard, faster than she'd imagined, and maybe it was time to tell them the truth. "Let's go home," she suggested, standing up with Brody still in her arms. "We need to let everyone know we found you, little man." On the way back, Brody fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the adventure and the emotional stress. Catherine seized the moment to talk to Richard. "I think it's time, Richard, to tell them the truth." He glanced at her quickly, surprise and hope in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Yes, they're already bonding with you naturally. And as we saw today, that could lead to dangerous situations if not handled properly." Richard nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "How do you think we should do it?" "Tonight after dinner," calmly, answering all their questions. "What if they reject me?" he asked, insecurity evident in his usually confident voice. "What if they're angry I wasn't there all these years?" Catherine sighed, looking at her sleeping son in the back seat. "They're understanding kids, Richard, and eager to have a father. Of course, there'll be tough questions, maybe even some anger at times, but in the end, love will win." "How can you be so sure?" "Because they're your children," she replied simply. "They have your blood, your heart. And despite all your flaws, your heart has always been good, Richard." He looked at her with surprise and gratitude, a small smile forming on his lips. "Thank you for saying that, Catherine. It means a lot." When they arrived at the mansion, they found everyone anxiously waiting in the front garden. Mrs. Margaret, Mrs. Edith, the other 2 triplets, and even Diana, who had stayed to help with the search. "Hiya, Brody," Brandon and Benjamin shouted in unison, running to the car as their now awake brother stepped out. "Where were you? Why didn't you wait for us?" They bombarded him with questions while hugging him tightly. "I wanted to surprise you," Brody answered shyly. "But I got lost." Mrs. Margaret approached, her eyes red from crying. "Thank goodness you're safe, my angel. Don't ever scare us like that again." As everyone went inside, Diana lingered slightly apart, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Richard walked over to her. "Thank you for your help, Diana. It was unexpected." "No need to thank me," she replied with dignity. "Anyone would do the same for a lost child." Catherine, sensing the tension between the engaged couple, joined them. Diana was crucial, Richard. She was the one who got the tip about Brody being seen at the park. Diana smiled faintly, grateful for the acknowledgement. "Well, now that everything's settled, I should be going," she said, grabbing her car keys. "I have some pending commitments." "Wait," Catherine said, surprising both Diana and Richard. "Why don't you stay for dinner? It would be our way of thanking you for your help." Diana seemed taken aback by the invitation. "I don't know if that would be appropriate." "Please," insisted Catherine. "The boys would like to get to know you properly, and I think we have an important conversation to have tonight. You should be here." Richard looked at Catherine in surprise, understanding what she was suggesting. "Catherine is right," he agreed after a moment. "Please stay, Diana." The young woman hesitated, glancing between them, before finally nodding. "All right, thank you for the invitation." Dinner unfolded in an oddly harmonious atmosphere, considering the circumstances. The triplets, recovered from their earlier scare, dominated the conversation with their endless stories and questions. Diana, initially reserved, soon found herself charmed by Brandon's vibrant personality, Benjamin's sharp intelligence, and Brody's artistic sensitivity. "You're really pretty," Brandon remarked with his usual bluntness. "Are you Mr. Harrington's girlfriend?" Diana nearly choked on her water while Richard looked at Catherine for help. "Brandon, that kind of question can be too personal," Catherine gently scolded. "It's all right," Diana interjected with a smile. "Yes, Brandon, I am Mr. Harrington's girlfriend." "Are you going to get married?" the curious boy pressed. An awkward silence fell over the table. It was Richard who finally answered, "Actually, Brandon, there are some things we need to talk about after dinner. Important things about me, about you boys, about our connection." The three boys looked at him curiously, then at their mother, who gave a slight nod. "Is it a grown-up talk?" Benjamin asked, adjusting his reading glasses. "It's a family talk," Catherine corrected gently, "and you three are the most important part of it." After dinner, while Mrs. Edith served coffee and hot chocolate in the living room, Catherine and Richard exchanged glances, silently confirming the moment had come. Diana had offered to leave, giving the family privacy, but Catherine insisted she stay. "Boys," Catherine began, sitting on the couch with the triplets gathered around her, "you've always asked me about your father, remember?" The three nodded, suddenly serious and attentive. "I always said he lived far away, that one. Day you'd meet him. Well, that day is here." The boys' eyes widened, first fixed on their mother, then slowly shifting to Richard, who stood by the fireplace, more nervous than he'd ever been in his life. "Mr. Harrington is our dad?" Benjamin asked, the first to make the logical connection. Catherine nodded, carefully watching her son's reactions. "Yes, Benji, Richard is your father." A deep silence filled the room. Brandon was the first to break it. "I knew it," he exclaimed triumphantly. "We have the same eyes and the same way of crossing our arms when we're thinking." Benjamin seemed to process the information more analytically. "But if he's our dad, why didn't he ever visit before? Why doesn't he live with us?" The direct question hit Richard like a punch. He stepped forward, kneeling in front of the boys. "Because I didn't know you existed," he answered honestly. "Your mum and I separated before she found out she was pregnant, and then, well, there were complications that kept us from communicating." "You didn't want us?" Brody asked quietly, insecurity clear in his voice. "No, bro," Richard exclaimed, his heart breaking at the question. "If I'd known about you, I would have done anything to be there. You're the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me, even if I've only known you for a few days." "Then why did you and Mom break up?" Benjamin persisted, always seeking to understand every angle. Catherine and Richard exchanged glances, uncertain how much to reveal. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Catherine began carefully. "Your father and I were young, and we let misunderstandings tear us apart." "It was my fault," admitted Richard, surprising Catherine. "I believed lies about your mother instead of trusting her like I should have. It was the biggest mistake of my life." The triplets absorbed every word, processing them in different ways according to their unique personalities. "And now?" Brandon asked bluntly. "Are you going to live with us?" Richard looked at Catherine, then at Diana, who was silently observing from a corner of the room. "No, Brandon, at least not for now. But I want to be part of your lives if you'll let me. I want to get to know you, watch you grow, be a real father. Even if we live in separate houses," the boy pressed. "Even then, Richard." Confirmed. "There are many ways to be a family, Brandon. What matters is the love and respect between people." Brody, who had been quiet until then, suddenly stood up and ran to Richard, throwing himself into his arms in a spontaneous, emotional hug. "I always wanted a dad," the boy whispered. Richard held him tightly, tears streaming freely down his face. "And I always wanted you, even without knowing it," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Brandon and Benjamin joined the embrace, creating an emotional knot in the middle of the room. Catherine watched with tears in her eyes, conflicting feelings battling in her chest, joy for the reunion of father and sons, regret for the lost years, hope for the future. Diana stood up quietly and headed for the door. Catherine followed. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Diana smiled sadly. "I'm fine, it's just too much for me right now. They need this time together, without any extra complications." "Thank you for staying," Catherine said sincerely. "It meant a lot, especially to Richard. He's a good man, Catherine," Diana replied with surprising generosity. "He makes mistakes, like all of us, but he has a good heart." "I know." The two women looked at each other with new understanding. An unexpected connection formed through shared experience. "Take good care of them," Diana asked before leaving. "All of them." When Catherine returned to the living room, she found Richard sitting on the couch with the three boys around him, showing old photos on his phone. "This is me at your age," he explained, swiping to an image of a blonde boy who looked strikingly similar to the triplets. "And this is my childhood home before my parents moved to Aspen." "Wow, you had a big dog too," Brandon exclaimed, pointing at the photo. "Rex," Richard confirmed with a nostalgic smile. "He was a Labrador, loved swimming in the lake on the property." "Can we get a dog, Mum?" Brandon immediately asked, turning to Catherine. "We'll see," she replied with a smile, sitting in a nearby armchair. "One step at a time." The evening wore on as the boys bombarded Richard with questions about his childhood, his likes, his skills. They wanted to make up for all the lost time in a single night, eager to know the father they had just discovered. When bedtime finally arrived, Richard helped Catherine tuck them in, joining the nightly routine as if he had always been part of it. He told stories, checked for monsters under the beds, gave goodnight kisses. When the last of the triplets finally fell asleep, Catherine and Richard went back downstairs, emotionally exhausted but strangely light, as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. "They're amazing, Catherine," Richard remarked, accepting the glass of wine she offered. "So different from each other, yet so alike." "They're the best of both of us," she agreed, sitting in the opposite armchair. "The determination I always admired in you, the sensitivity you said you admired in me." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the crackling of the fireplace and the soft ticking of the wall clock. "And now?" Richard finally asked, echoing the question Brandon had posed hours earlier. "Where do we go from here?" Catherine took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "One day at a time. You getting to know the boys better, establishing a routine with them. Legal matters about custody, financial responsibilities. I don't care about money, Catherine, you know that." "I do. But these are practical aspects we need to sort out for their sake." Richard nodded in understanding. "What about us?" he asked, looking her directly in the eyes. "Is there any chance of starting over?" Catherine felt her heart race at the direct question. "Richard, there are so many complications, so much history between us." "I know," he gently interrupted. "And I don't expect immediate answers. I just want you to know that these days with you, with the boys, made me realize how much I lost, how much I threw away because of pride and insecurity. We both made mistakes," Catherine admitted. "I should have fought harder, should have found a way to tell you about the boys, no matter what had happened between us. We can learn from those mistakes," Richard suggested, hope in his voice. "Together." Catherine smiled faintly, her guard beginning to lower. "Maybe. But first, we need to fully settle the past. There are still many truths to be revealed, many wounds to heal." "Gregory," Richard said, the name heavy with fresh suspicion. "I need to confront him, Catherine, with Jennifer's testimony, with everything we've uncovered." "Be careful," she warned, genuinely concerned. "He's dangerous when cornered. He's proven that once before." Richard reached his hand across the coffee table, a gesture of connection. After a moment's hesitation, Catherine accepted, their fingers lightly intertwining. "We'll face this together," he promised, "for our children and maybe for us." That night marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of discoveries, of reconnection, of healing. The path ahead would be winding, with Gregory still posing a threat, with unresolved emotional issues, with a past that demanded amends. But for the first time in 8 years, both Catherine and Richard allowed themselves to glimpse a future where the broken fragments of their lives might perhaps be pieced back together, not exactly as they were before, but in a new arrangement, wiser, stronger, shaped by the lessons only time and pain can teach. The next morning, Catherine woke to the sound of laughter coming from the garden. Looking out the window, she saw Richard playing ball with the triplets, all 4 of them completely at ease with one another, as if they had always been part of each other's lives. He had returned early, bringing gifts. 3 identical small bicycles the boys were now proudly showing off. There was a lightness in Richard that Catherine hadn't seen in years, perhaps had never seen before. The usually serious, controlled businessman had given way to a man running across the lawn, letting himself be dramatically tackled when one of the boys managed to steal the ball from him, sending the children into fits of laughter. He arrived, even before breakfast, Mrs. Margaret remarked, approaching with a cup of coffee for Catherine. He looked like a child on Christmas morning, eager to show off the bikes. Catherine accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "The boys seem happy." "So does their father," the elderly woman observed shrewdly. "I've never seen Richard so radiant, not even when you two were newlyweds." Catherine didn't respond, but her heart raced as she watched the scene. It was like glimpsing an alternate future, the one they might have had if not for the misunderstandings, the manipulations, the hurt. "It's going to be an important day," continued Mrs. Margaret. "Richard told me about the DNA test and Jennifer's testimony." "Yes," agreed Catherine, turning to her mother-in-law. "Jennifer will formalize everything today at the notary's office, and the test is just a formality to ensure the boys have all their rights legally recognized." "And then what?" asked Mrs. Margaret, with the wisdom of someone who's lived many years and seen many love stories unfold. "What happens when all these practical matters are settled?" Catherine sighed, watching the scene in the garden again. "I don't know." "Mrs. Margaret, there's so much between us, it's so much lost time, so much pain." "Pain heals, my dear. Lost time can be made up with quality time. What you can't recover is the chance to be happy when it's right in front of you." Catherine smiled at the elderly woman, tenderly squeezing her wrinkled hand. "When did you get so wise?" "When I lost my husband too soon and realized I'd wasted precious time on silly resentments I can't even remember now," replied Mrs. Margaret with a melancholic smile. "Life's too short to hold grudges, Catherine, especially against people we love." The conversation was interrupted by Brandon, who ran into the kitchen, breathless with excitement. "Mom, Dad said he's taking us horseback riding after lunch. Can we go? Please say yes." The natural use of the word dad didn't escape Catherine. It was amazing how quickly children could adapt to change, accepting it with a simplicity adults had lost over the years. "Of course you can," she replied, gently smoothing her son's tousled hair. "But first breakfast, and then you have to finish that homework we started yesterday." "Dad already said he'd help," exclaimed Brandon, running back to the garden to share the good news with his brothers. As she watched her son leave, Catherine felt a tightness in her chest. This was all she'd ever wanted for her children, a present, loving, enthusiastic father. But the price might be too high for her wounded heart. After breakfast, Catherine and Richard left the boys in Mrs. Margaret's care and headed to the lab for the DNA test, then to the notary's office where Jennifer was waiting to formalize her testimony. The procedure would be simple. A saliva sample from Richard and one previously collected from one of the triplets would be enough to confirm paternity. "Nervous?" Catherine asked as she drove. "A little," admitted Richard. "Not about the result itself. I know they're my sons, but about what this officially represents. The responsibility, the commitment." "You don't need to worry about that, Richard," Catherine interrupted, misreading his words. "I'm not asking for anything beyond what you're willing to give. The boys and I are financially secure." Richard looked at her in surprise. "I'm not talking about money, Catherine. I'm talking about being a father, truly, being present, being part of their decisions, helping shape who they become. It's a huge responsibility, especially knowing I missed 7 years of their lives." Catherine felt ashamed for assuming the worst. "I'm sorry, I'm still on guard, I guess." "Understandable," he conceded. "But I want you to know I plan to be a present father. Not to make up for lost time, I know that's impossible, but to make sure they have what they deserve from here on out." "They'll be lucky to have you as their father," Catherine said sincerely. "You've always been good with kids, even when you said you weren't ready for your own." Richard smiled sadly, remembering the arguments they had early in their marriage, when Catherine wanted to start a family, and he insisted they needed to wait for the right time. "How ironic, isn't it? Me saying I wasn't ready and now ending up with 3 kids at once, all grown and educated." "Life has a peculiar sense of humor," Catherine agreed, parking in front of the lab. The procedure was quick and simple. In just a few days, they'd have official confirmation of what they already knew in their hearts. As they left the lab, Richard got a call that made him frown. "Gregory," he said, showing the phone screen to Catherine. "What should I do?" "Answer it," she suggested, "but put it on speaker." Richard nodded and took the call. "Gregory, I'm with Catherine. You're on speaker." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Oh, I see," Gregory finally said, his tone unnaturally casual. "So we're at that stage now, doing things together as one big, happy, reunited family?" "What do you want, Gregory?" Richard asked coldly. "Just letting you know your presence is required at the office. We have a meeting with the investors for the Sunrise project in an hour, and you haven't responded to emails since yesterday." "The project can wait," Richard replied. "I'm handling important personal matters." "Personal matters?" Gregory's voice hardened. "Richard, we're talking about the biggest venture in Harrington Construction's history. Millions in investments that could go down the drain if you keep up this distraction." Catherine watched Richard's face as he listened to his friend's words. She could see the internal struggle, the old Richard who prioritized business above all, clashing with the new man who was starting to understand what truly mattered. "It's not a distraction, Gregory," he finally answered. "They're my sons, and I'll join that meeting by video call from wherever I am. If that's not acceptable to the investors, maybe they're not the right partners for us." Another silence followed by a forced laugh. "Your sons? Right. I assume you've already done the DNA test to confirm this convenient claim." "We just took the test, yes," Richard confirmed, "but only as a formality. Anyone who looks at those boys can see they're mine." "Looks can be deceiving, my friend," Gregory insisted, "especially when there's a fortune at stake." "Catherine doesn't need my money," Richard said firmly. "She built her own empire. Something you'd know if you'd done your homework, instead of jumping to conclusions." "Richard, I'm trying to protect you," Gregory exclaimed, frustration clear in his voice, "like I have for the past 20 years. Is that what you call what you did?" Catherine cut in, unable to hold back. "Protecting? Ah, Catherine herself," Gregory remarked sarcastically. "Still manipulating situations to your advantage, I see." "Let's get to the point, Gregory," Richard said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in tough negotiations. "I met Jennifer Parker yesterday. Right now we're on our way to the notary's office, where she'll officially testify about how you bribed and threatened her into giving false testimony against Catherine." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the sound of Gregory's ragged breathing. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally replied, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. "Don't insult my intelligence," Richard shot back. "It's over, Gregory. All the lies, all the manipulation. And after we're done at the notary's, I'm launching a full audit of the company. I want to know exactly what you've been doing. In the shadows all these years." "You can't do this." Gregory's voice now sounded almost desperate. "Half that company is mine." "A half you obtained through manipulation and lies," Richard countered. "We'll see what the courts have to say about that." "You'll regret this, Richard," Gregory threatened, his tone now icy. "Both of you." Before Richard could respond, the call ended. "That wasn't good," remarked Catherine, feeling a chill run down her spine. "He sounded dangerous." "Gregory has always been more talk than action," replied Richard, though his expression showed concern, "but we'd better not underestimate what he might do when cornered." When they arrived at the notary's office, they found Lauren, Catherine's lawyer, already waiting at the entrance. Her usually composed face showed signs of worry. "Jennifer called," she informed them as they approached. "She's not coming." "What? Why?" asked Catherine, alarmed. "She received threats," Lauren explained. "Someone left a package at her door this morning with pictures of her daughter who lives in New York. The message was clear. If she talks, her daughter will pay the price." "Gregory," murmured Richard, anger rising in his voice. "He doesn't waste time." "We need to find her," Catherine decided. "Convince her we can protect her and her daughter." "I'm already on it," Lauren assured. "I sent one of my assistants to her house, while another is checking the neighborhood security cameras to identify who delivered the package." Richard nodded, impressed by the efficiency of Catherine's lawyer. "In the meantime, we need to focus on what we have," Lauren continued. "The documents Mrs. Margaret kept could be crucial, and Jennifer's testimony, even if unofficial, gives us a direction for the investigation." "We should head back home," Catherine said, checking her watch. "The boys will be waiting for lunch, and Richard promised to take them horseback riding afterward." "Go," Lauren agreed. "I'll be in touch as soon as we have news about Jennifer. And Richard, if you can grant me access to Harrington Construction's financial records, especially transactions involving Gregory, that would be very helpful." Richard hesitated for just a second, decades of business caution warring with the new trust he was beginning to feel. "I'll send them today," he finally decided. As they drove home, Catherine noticed Richard seemed preoccupied, constantly checking his phone. "Something wrong?" she asked. "Diana's been trying to call me since this morning, but I've been too busy to answer," he admitted. "We need to talk about, well, all of this." "Yes, you do," Catherine agreed. "She deserves to know what she's getting into." Richard looked at her curiously. "You seem to be defending her. I thought you'd be natural rivals." Catherine smiled slightly. "Rivals for what? The grand prize that is Richard Harrington," she teased, but without malice. He laughed, appreciating the moment of lightness amid so much tension. "Just as modest as I remember," he quipped. "But seriously, you and Diana seem to have an understanding I didn't expect." "We had a good talk yesterday," Catherine explained, "before all the chaos with Brody's disappearance. She's different than I imagined. More mature, more aware." "I underestimated her," Richard admitted, "just like I underestimated you years ago." "A troubling pattern," Catherine observed, though her tone was gentle. "Maybe you should work on that." "I'm trying," he assured, a shy smile on his lips. "To be better, I mean, for myself, for the boys, for whatever future we might have." The unspoken "we" hung in the air, not confronted, but not rejected either. When they arrived at the mansion, they found an unusual scene. Diana was in the garden with the triplets, helping them assemble their new bikes. Mrs. Margaret supervised everything from the porch, her wrinkled face showing approval. "Diana," Richard exclaimed, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." The young woman stood up, brushing grass off her casual jeans, a look far removed from the elegant socialite she usually presented. "I called Mrs. Margaret when you didn't answer my calls," she explained. "I told her I'd come by to pick up some things I left at your place, and she invited me to stop here first." "She's been a huge help," Brandon said enthusiastically. "She knows everything about bikes. I grew up fixing my own on my grandfather's ranch," Diana replied with a smile. Not exactly a born and bred socialite, no matter what the gossip. Magazines like to say. Catherine watched the interaction with interest. There was an authenticity to Diana she hadn't noticed before, maybe because the young woman had always been defensive around her. "Can we talk?" Richard asked Diana, gesturing toward the house. "Of course," she agreed, following him inside. Catherine stayed behind with the boys, showing appropriate interest in the bikes while trying not to think about the conversation happening inside. What would Richard say to Diana? How would she react? And why did she care so much? "Mom, can I ask you something?" Benjamin said, always the most perceptive of the triplets. "Of course, Benji. Are you and Dad going to live together again? Like a normal family?" Catherine's heart clenched. Of course, this question would come up sooner or later. "Life isn't that simple, sweetheart," she replied carefully. "Your dad and I have a lot of history, a lot to work through. What matters is we both love you and we always will, whether we live together or not. But do you still like him?" the boy pressed, with a sharpness that always surprised her. Catherine hesitated, aware that Brandon and Brody were just as eager for her answer. "Yes," she finally admitted. "Part of me will always care about your dad. He's a special person with wonderful qualities, but caring about someone isn't always enough to make a relationship work." "Because of Uncle Gregory's lies?" Brandon asked, startling her with his understanding. "You know about that?" Catherine asked, stunned. "We heard you talking last night," Brody confessed sheepishly. "Not on purpose. We were getting water and you were in the living room." Catherine sighed. She should have been more careful. "Yes, that was part of it. But relationships are complicated, kids. Sometimes people hurt each other, even without meaning to, and it's hard to move past that. But not impossible, right?" Brody asked hopefully. "Ms. Tara always says nothing's impossible if you really want it." "Ms. Tara is very wise," Catherine replied with a smile, ruffling her son's hair affectionately. "Now how about we make lunch? I'm starving, and I bet you are too." As they headed to the kitchen, Catherine couldn't shake Brody's words. Nothing's impossible if you really want it. The question was, what did she really want? Richard and Diana emerged from the house about an hour later, just as Catherine and the boys were setting the table for lunch. There were no obvious signs of tears or heated arguments, just quiet determination on both their faces. "Catherine," Diana called, approaching while Richard joined the boys. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" The two stepped onto the porch for privacy. "Richard told me everything," Diana began, "about the DNA test, Gregory's manipulations, the testimony the housekeeper was going to give." Catherine nodded, unsure where this was going. "We officially ended things," the young woman continued, surprising Catherine with her bluntness. "It was mutual. He has a family to rebuild, and I deserve to be more than a footnote in someone else's story." "I'm sorry," Catherine said sincerely. "Don't be," Diana replied with a serene smile. "It's the right thing to do. And you know what's funny? I feel lighter than I have in a long time, like I'm finally free to be myself, without trying to fit into everyone's expectations of the perfect socialite." Catherine smiled, recognizing the feeling. "I know exactly what you mean. It took me years to feel that way after leaving." "Haspen, is that why you built your empire? To prove you could?" "Partly," Catherine admitted, "but also because I had 3 mouths to feed and a future to secure." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "You know he still loves you, don't you?" she said abruptly. Catherine blinked, caught off guard by her frankness. "Diana, You don't have to say anything," the younger woman gently interrupted. "I'm not trying to force a reconciliation or anything. I just thought you should know. He never fully got over you. Even when we were good together, there was always a part of him that seemed absent. Now I understand why." "Things are complicated," Catherine replied, unsure how to react to the revelation. "Life is complicated," Diana corrected with a philosophical shrug. "Love shouldn't be. But anyway, I came to say goodbye. I'm heading back to New York today. I need a fresh start away from all of this." "Take care, Diana," Catherine said, extending her hand. "And thank you for everything." Diana accepted the gesture but surprised Catherine by turning it into a brief hug. Be happy, Catherine. All four of you deserve that. After Diana left, lunch carried on in an air of excited anticipation. The triplets barely touched their food, eager for the horseback ride Richard had promised. He too seemed distant, as if processing his conversation with his ex-fiancée and all the implications of what lay ahead. As they were finishing dessert, Catherine's phone rang. It was Lauren. "Catherine, we found Jennifer. She's safe but still shaken. I managed to convince her to give a statement if we guarantee protection for her and her daughter." "Excellent work, Lauren," Catherine exclaimed, relieved. "When can we do this?" "Tomorrow morning, and I have more news. The security cameras in her building captured the delivery person with the threatening package. We're working to identify him, but we already have leads that he's a security guard who often does side jobs for Gregory." "That's perfect," Catherine replied. "More evidence for our case." "Yes, but we need to be careful," Lauren warned. "Gregory is cornered, and people like that can be dangerous. Keep your eyes open and don't take unnecessary risks." After hanging up, Catherine relayed the conversation to Richard, who nodded gravely. "We need to be cautious," he agreed, "especially with the boys around." "Are we still going to the ranch for the horseback ride?" Catherine asked hesitantly. Richard thought for a moment. "I think so. It's a secure location with trusted staff, and I don't want to disappoint the boys. Besides, staying on the move is probably safer than staying in one place." Clearwater Ranch, Richard's property for over a decade, was about 40 minutes from Aspen. It was a peaceful retreat nestled in the mountains, with lush meadows, a small lake, and well-kept stables where he kept his prized horses. When they arrived, the triplets were awestruck by the idyllic setting. Brandon, always the most adventurous, could barely contain his excitement at the sight of the majestic animals. Benjamin observed everything with scientific curiosity, asking questions about breeds and habits. Brody, the most cautious, approached timidly, fascinated but apprehensive. "I've never ridden a horse before," he confessed to Richard, who knelt to meet his son's eye level. "You don't need to be afraid," the father assured. "We'll start slow and I'll be right by your side the whole time." The handler had already picked out suitable mounts for the children, gentle, well-trained ponies accustomed to beginners. Richard helped each of the boys climb on, showing them how to hold the reins and give basic commands. "Look, Mom, I'm doing it," shouted Brandon, who quickly mastered the basics and was already trotting around the pen under the watchful eye of one of the instructors. Catherine watched the scene from a rustic bench, her heart overflowing with emotion. Seeing her sons trying new things, overcoming fears, growing, all under the proud and attentive gaze of the father they had just met, was more than she had ever dared to dream. "They're amazing, aren't they?" Richard commented, sitting beside her after making sure each triplet was safely paired with an instructor. "They're perfect," Catherine agreed, unable to hide the pride in her voice. "Just like you," he added softly, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Richard, please," she began, uneasy with where the conversation was heading. "I know it's not the right time," he gently interrupted, "that there's still so much to work through, so many wounds to heal. I just want you to know that when you're ready, if you ever are, I'll be here waiting." Catherine didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to dive head first into the us he was offering, to leave the past behind and rebuild what they had lost. Another part, more cautious, reminded her of all the nights she had cried alone, of all the times she had doubted her own worth after being so completely rejected. "One day at a time," was all she could finally say. "For now, let's focus on the boys. They need stability, they need safety." Richard nodded, respecting her boundaries. "One day at a time," he agreed. The rest of the afternoon was spent with the horses, a picnic by the lake, and stories Richard told about his own childhood on that very ranch. The triplets absorbed every word, every shared memory, as if trying to make up for the 7 years without a father. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they gathered to head back to the city. The boys were exhausted but radiant, already planning their next visit. That's when they noticed the smoke, thick and black, rising above the trees in the direction of Aspen. "What's that?" Brandon asked, pointing. Richard frowned, concerned. "Looks like a fire, and it's in the direction of our house," Catherine finished, her chest tightening. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Richard immediately grabbed his phone, dialing the city's emergency number. The confirmation came quickly. A fire had been reported at the mansion Catherine was renting. Firefighters were already on site trying to contain the flames. We have to go, she said, her voice trembling. Mrs. Margaret is there alone with Mrs. Edith. The boys, Richard hesitated, looking at the three children watching with wide, fearful eyes. They can stay here with the ranch staff, Catherine decided quickly. They'll be safer. Richard agreed, giving instructions to the trusted employees before they drove off toward the city. The 40-minute drive felt endless, with Catherine repeatedly calling Mrs. Margaret's cell phone. No answer. When they finally arrived, the scene was devastating. Fire trucks were parked in front of the mansion, water jets struggling to tame, the flames devouring the east wing. Neighbors and onlookers crowded the sidewalks, watching the tragic spectacle. Mrs. Margaret, shouted Catherine, running toward the crowd. Has anyone seen Mrs. Margaret? One of the firefighters approached. The elderly lady and the housekeeper were rescued in time, he informed them, to their relief. They're being treated in that ambulance over there. They rushed over and found Mrs. Margaret sitting in the back of the ambulance, an oxygen mask on her face. Mrs. Edith was beside her, seemingly unharmed but visibly shaken. Thank God you're both all right, exclaimed Catherine, carefully embracing the older woman. What happened? Mrs. Margaret removed the mask for a moment. It was so fast, she said, her voice hoarse from the smoke. We were in the kitchen when we heard a strange noise coming from the study. By the time Edith went to check, there were already flames everywhere. It almost seemed like the fire started in multiple places at once, added Mrs. Edith, still trembling, as if someone had planned it. Richard and Catherine exchanged worried glances. This couldn't be a coincidence. Gregory muttered. Richard, anger clear in his voice. He did this. A firefighter approached, removing his helmet. Mr. Harrington, I'm Captain Matthews. We found something you should see. They followed the firefighter to a safe area, where he showed them the charred remains of what looked like an electronic device. We found 3 of these in the house, he explained. They're makeshift incendiary devices with timers. Someone planted them deliberately. The police have already been notified. Any chance of saving the structure? Asked Catherine, looking at the burning mansion. The east wing is lost, the captain answered honestly. We're focusing on containing the fire so it doesn't spread to other areas, but the damage will be extensive. Catherine nodded, trying to process it all. Their temporary home, their belongings, the boys' clothes and toys, everything was being consumed by the flames. Where will we stay now? She asked, more to herself than to Richard. With me, he replied without hesitation. My house is big enough for all of you, and it's the safest place right now. Before Catherine could respond, they were interrupted by a police officer approaching with a grave expression. Mr. Harrington, Ms. Mitchell, I'm Detective Thompson. We need to talk about this incident. Everything points to arson. We know who did this, Richard said immediately. Gregory Peterson, my partner at the construction company. We're in the middle of a complicated dispute. The detective noted the information. We'll investigate, of course, but we'll need formal statements and any evidence you can provide. My attorney will contact you tomorrow with all the necessary documentation, Catherine assured him. Right now, our priority is the children and the elderly. After finalizing details with the authorities and ensuring Mrs. Margaret was well enough to be released from the ambulance, they headed to the ranch to pick up the triplets. On the way, Richard made a quick call to his housekeeper, instructing her to prepare rooms for everyone. I'm so sorry about all this, Catherine, he said as he drove. Somehow I feel responsible. Gregory has always been my problem, and now he's affecting you and the kids. It's not your fault, she replied, physically and emotionally exhausted. Gregory made his own choices. And frankly, if he thinks a fire will intimidate us, he doesn't know the woman I've become these past 8 years. Richard smiled, despite the gravity of the situation. That's the Catherine I fell in love with, he remarked. Fierce, as a lioness when it comes to protecting her own. She didn't respond, but something inside her warmed at his words. The triplets, as expected, were initially frightened by the news of the fire, but the prospect of staying at their father's house, which they hadn't yet visited, brought some excitement amid the worry. "Are we going to live with Daddy?" asked Brody, his eyes shining with hope. "Only temporarily, sweetheart," Catherine clarified, "until we find a new place to stay." "But why can't we stay there forever?" insisted Brandon always. "Direct. It'd be so much easier." Catherine and Richard exchanged awkward glances. "It's complicated, son," Richard replied gently. "But for now, let's focus on making sure everyone is comfortable and safe, okay?" Richard's mansion was everything Catherine remembered, and more. Imposing, with architectural features blending classic European and modern elements, many of which she herself had suggested early in their marriage. Strange how some things remained exactly as she'd left them, while others had changed completely. The housekeeper, Mrs. Olson, an efficient woman in her 60s, had prepared everything with surprising speed. Adjacent rooms for the triplets, a comfortable suite for Catherine, and a special ground-floor bedroom for Mrs. Margaret, considering her difficulty with stairs. "Thank you for taking us in like this, so suddenly," Catherine said to the housekeeper, who simply smiled. "It's a pleasure to have life in this house again, Mrs. Mitchell. It's been very quiet here these past few years. That night was strange and familiar at the same time. Dinner in the same room where so many meals had been shared, listening to the boys' footsteps running down the halls she once imagined would be filled with the sound of children, their children with Richard. When she finally got the triplets to sleep, exhausted after the chaotic day, Catherine found Richard in the library, a glass of whiskey in hand, gazing at the fire in the fireplace. "The boys finally fell asleep," she informed him, pausing at the door, unsure whether to enter what had once been her refuge. "Come in," he invited, gesturing to the armchair opposite his. "Care for a drink? I think we both need one." Catherine nodded, accepting the glass he poured for her. The first sip burned her throat in a familiar, comforting way. "It's strange being here again," she confessed, looking around at the shelves filled with books, many of which she had picked out herself. "Almost as if no time has passed." "But it has," Richard replied thoughtfully. "And it's brought changes I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams." They sat in silence for a moment, only the crackling of the fire filling the space. "Lauren called while you were with the boys," Richard informed her. "The police are looking for Gregory, but he seems to have disappeared. His phone is off, and no one's seen him since this morning." "That's concerning," Catherine remarked, frowning. "What is he planning now?" "I don't know, but I won't let him hurt you or the boys again," Richard vowed, determination clear in his voice. "Tomorrow we'll proceed with Jennifer's testimony no matter what, and I'll request a full audit of Harrington Construction. It's time to end this once and for all." Catherine nodded, grateful for his resolve. "Richard, thank you. For everything. For believing in me, even if belatedly. For welcoming the boys so readily. For giving us shelter when we needed it." He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You don't have to thank me for that, Catherine. You're my family. No matter what happens between us, that will never change." Something in the way he said "between us" made Catherine shiver slightly. There was so much hope, so much expectation in those two small words. "We should rest," she suggested, finishing her drink and standing up. "Tomorrow will be another difficult day." "Of course," he agreed, rising as well. "Is your room comfortable? Do you need anything else?" "It's perfect, thank you." As she turned to leave, Richard called out, "Catherine?" She turned back, finding him closer than she expected. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "Even under the worst circumstances, having you four in this house, it's like it's finally complete." Catherine didn't know what to say, so she just nodded slightly before leaving, her heart beating in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. The morning brought troubling news. Over breakfast, Richard received a call from his accountant, Large. Sums of money had been transferred from the construction company's accounts to tax havens in the last 24 hours. All electronic signatures indicated authorization from Gregory. "He's running," Richard concluded, hanging up the phone, "and taking whatever he can." That's good for us in a way, Catherine remarked. It's practically a confession of guilt. Yes, but it complicates the company's financial situation. Even more, many jobs depend on it, ongoing projects. Catherine could see genuine concern on his face. Behind the wealthy businessman was a man who cared about his employees, about the families who relied on his business. We'll figure this out, she promised, one step at a time. The plan for the day was clear. Catherine would take the triplets to buy clothes and essentials, since everything had been lost in the fire, while Richard accompanied Jennifer to the notary to formalize her statement. Later, they would meet with Lauren to discuss the next legal steps. The morning passed without incident. The triplets, despite the situation, were excited about the trip to the mall, especially since they rarely had the chance to pick out their own clothes. Catherine usually preferred buying identical items for all three to avoid arguments. Can I have a blue shirt instead of green like theirs? Brody asked timidly, holding up a piece that had caught his eye. Catherine smiled, noticing how the boys were starting to assert their individuality. Of course, bro, choose whatever you like best. By noon, she received a text from Richard. Jennifer's statement completed and official. She's safe and doing well, proceeding as planned. Meet you at Lauren's office at 2 p.m. Catherine breathed a sigh of relief. At least that had gone well. Maybe the tide was finally turning in their favor. After a quick lunch at the mall, they started heading back. Catherine decided to make a brief stop at the burned-down mansion to see if anything could be salvaged. The scene in daylight was even more desolate. The elegant property, with its well-kept gardens and imposing architecture, now had an entire wing completely destroyed. The broken windows looked like empty eyes staring at the sky, the acrid smell of smoke still lingering in the air. "Our home," Brandon murmured sadly, looking out the car window. "The firefighters said we can go in briefly to check the unaffected area," Catherine informed them, parking at a safe distance. "But you need to stay in the car, okay? It's not safe for kids." Reluctantly, the triplets agreed. Catherine stepped out of the vehicle and approached the police tape cordoning off the property. A firefighter recognized her and allowed her inside, accompanying her for safety. The interior of the house was a scene of devastation: charred furniture, blackened walls, the suffocating smell of smoke clinging to everything. The West Wing, where the boys' rooms had been, was less affected, though there was still significant damage from smoke and water. In Brody's room, Catherine found something that made her heart clench. The photo album she had kept since the triplets' birth, partially damaged but still salvageable. She carefully placed it in a plastic bag offered by the firefighter. It was in the office, or what remained of it, that she stumbled upon something unexpected. Among the debris, a cell phone she didn't recognize. It seemed to have been deliberately left in a spot less exposed to the flames. "This isn't mine," she told the firefighter, showing the device. "It must belong to the insurance investigator. He was here earlier," the man replied. Catherine turned on the phone, which surprisingly still worked. There was no passcode, and the home screen showed only an open notes app with a message. "Look in the attic of her house. The truth is there. He never imagined she'd keep everything." G. Catherine's heart raced. G. Gregory? Her house, Mrs. Margaret? The attic where she said she'd stored Catherine's things? "I need to go," she told the firefighter, pocketing the phone. An emergency came up. She hurried back to the car, where the triplets waited anxiously. "Change of plans, boys. We're stopping by Grandma Margaret's house before Aunt Lauren's office." "But isn't her house flooded?" Benjamin asked, confused. "The water has receded enough for us to get inside," Catherine explained, quickly typing a message to Richard about the discovery and their new destination. Mrs. Margaret's old house was in the lower part of town, which had been heavily affected by the floods. Access was still difficult, with mud and debris in the streets, but manageable with caution. When they arrived, they saw the house had suffered significant damage on the first floor, but the structure appeared intact. Catherine parked and turned to the boys. "I want you to stay in the car, locked up. Don't open the door for anyone except me or your father, understood?" "Why, Mom?" Brody asked, his eyes wide with worry. "Just a precaution, sweetheart. I'm going to get some important things from Grandma Margaret. and I'll be right back." With the boys safely locked in the car, Catherine entered the house cautiously. The smell of mold was overwhelming, and a layer of mud covered the first-floor flooring. She carefully climbed the stairs, heading toward what appeared to be the attic entrance, a retractable ladder in the hallway ceiling on the second floor. She pulled the dangling rope and the ladder creaked down. The attic was dark and dusty, but seemingly untouched by the flood. Using her phone's flashlight, Catherine began searching through old boxes and trunks, many meticulously labeled in Mrs. Margaret's elegant handwriting. She quickly found what she was looking for, several boxes marked Catherine Belongings. The first box held clothes and personal items she'd left behind in her rushed departure. The second contained photo albums and books, but it was the third box that held the treasure, her old laptop, along with a case of carefully organized documents. Among the papers, she found several letters, some still sealed, addressed to Richard, written by her in the early months after their separation, letters she had sent but apparently never reached him. There were also medical records detailing the in vitro fertilization treatment she had started while still married, with Richard's clear signature authorizing the procedure, something he later claimed not to remember. Even more disturbing, she found printed copies of emails, the supposed proof of infidelity Richard had seen. Looking at them now with experienced eyes and emotional distance, Catherine could clearly see the signs of manipulation. Inconsistencies in dates, subtle differences in the headers that indicated forgery. She stored everything in a folder, along with the laptop, and was preparing to go downstairs when she heard a sound coming from the lower floor. Footsteps. "Catherine," Richard's voice echoed through the empty house. "Are you here?" "In the attic," she replied, relieved. But when the figure appeared at the foot of the attic stairs, it wasn't Richard, it was Gregory. "Catherine," he said with a cold smile, "glad you found what you were looking for." She instinctively stepped back, clutching the folder to her chest. How did I know you'd be here?" he finished, slowly climbing the stairs. "It was easy. I left that phone for you to find. I knew you couldn't resist the bait." "What do you want, Gregory?" Catherine asked, trying to buy time, her mind racing for an escape. "What I've always wanted," he replied, reaching the top of the stairs. "You. And now, I also want my life. Back, the one you and those brats ruined in just a few days." "You ruined your own life," Catherine shot back, retreating as far as she could in the confined space. "With lies, manipulation, arson, details," he dismissed with a wave. "What matters is I have a plan. Let's leave, Catherine, you and me, somewhere Richard will never find us. I have enough money now, transferred from the construction company's accounts. We can start fresh." "You're insane," she declared, horrified. "I'd never go anywhere with you, and I'd never abandon my children." "Those little nuisances," Gregory spat, his face twisting in contempt. "They ruined everything. I had Richard exactly where I wanted him, controlling every aspect of his life, every business decision. Then you show up with 3 mini Richards, and suddenly he thinks he can think for himself." "You're sick, Gregory," Catherine said, genuinely, disturbed by his obsession. "You need help." "I need you," he insisted, stepping closer. "I always have. From the first time I saw him take you to dinner, I knew you should have been mine, not his." Catherine caught a glint in his hand, a small but sharp knife. "The boys are in the car," she said, trying to deter him. "They know I'm here. If anything happens to me, nothing will happen if you come willingly," Gregory assured, his voice almost pleading now. "We can pick up the boys later, if it means that much to you. I'll get used to them eventually." A sound from downstairs interrupted the tense moment. The front door opening again. "Catherine?" Richard's voice echoed through the house, genuine this time. "Are you up there? The boys are worried." Gregory's face twisted into a mask of hatred. "Always him," he muttered, "always interfering." "Catherine?" Richard called again, now closer, his heavy footsteps on the stairs. In a swift motion, Gregory grabbed Catherine's arm, pressing the knife against her side. "Not a word," he whispered threateningly, "or you'll regret it." "Catherine?" Richard appeared at the foot of the attic stairs, looking up. His expression changed instantly when he saw Gregory holding Catherine. "What's going on? Gregory, what the hell are you doing?" "Stay where you are, Richard," Gregory warned, pressing the knife harder, making Catherine gasp in pain. "Don't come closer." "Let her go," Richard ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Whatever you're thinking, this will only make things worse for you." "Worse?" Gregory laughed bitterly. "How could things get worse? You destroyed everything. Our friendship, our business, all because of her." "That's not true, and you know it," Richard replied, slowly climbing. "You ruined it all, Gregory, with your lies, your schemes, but we can still fix this civilly." "Don't come closer," Gregory shouted, panic rising in his voice. "I'm warning you!" But Richard kept climbing step by step carefully. "Think hard about what you're doing," he said calmly. "You're already wanted for embezzlement and arson. Don't add kidnapping and assault to the list." Catherine could feel Gregory trembling slightly, the pressure of the knife wavering. "You don't understand," he said, nearly crying now. "I loved her. I always did. And you never truly appreciated her." "You're right about that," Richard surprisingly agreed. "I didn't appreciate her. I made a terrible mistake trusting you over her. But I'm trying to fix that now. Please, Gregory, don't make a mistake you can't take back." A tense moment followed, the only sound being Gregory's heavy breathing. Then slowly he loosened his grip on Catherine. "It's over," Richard said, reaching out. "Hand over the knife." For a second, it seemed Gregory would surrender. But then, something hardened in his gaze. "No," he muttered. "If I can't have her, no one will." Everything happened in slow motion. Gregory raised the knife, aiming for Catherine's neck. Richard lunged forward with a warning shout. Catherine instinctively dodged, falling to the side. The knife missed its mark, slicing only her arm before Gregory lost his balance from the sudden movement. The attic stairs, old and unstable, gave way under the sudden weight. Gregory fell backward, tumbling down the steps until he hit the hallway floor with a dull thud. "Catherine!" Richard shouted, rushing to her, ignoring Gregory lying motionless. "Are you hurt?" "Just a cut on my arm," she replied, trembling. "It's not deep." Together they carefully descended what remained of the stairs. Gregory lay still on the ground, but was breathing. Richard used his tie to improvise a tourniquet for Catherine's arm, then called emergency services. Within minutes, the small house was filled with police and paramedics. Catherine's wound was treated, while Gregory, unconscious but stable, was prepared for transport to the hospital under police custody. "The boys," Catherine suddenly remembered. "They're still in the car." "They're fine," Richard assured her. "Lauren is with them. She arrived right after me, and I asked her to stay in the car with them." The events of the next few hours unfolded in a whirlwind. Police statements, a hospital visit to check Catherine's injury, documents recovered from the attic handed over to authorities. Lauren worked tirelessly, coordinating everything with impressive efficiency. When they finally returned to Richard's mansion, it was already night. The triplets, frightened but relieved to see their mother safe, asked 1,000 questions which were answered with softened versions of the truth. Mrs. Margaret, informed of what had happened, took on the task of distracting the boys with stories while Catherine and Richard spoke privately. In the library, the same setting as the night before, but with a completely different atmosphere. The immediate danger had passed. Gregory was in police custody at the hospital and would face a long list of charges when he recovered. The truth had finally come to light after 8 long years. "I can't believe it's over," Catherine said, accepting the glass of wine Richard offered. "There's still a lot to resolve," he replied, sitting beside her on the sofa, closer than the night before. "The construction company, the legal matters, recovering the embezzled money." "Yes, but the nightmare is over," she corrected. "We don't have to look over our shoulders anymore, afraid of what Gregory might do." Richard nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "When I think I could have lost you today," he began, his voice choked, "if he had struck true." "But he didn't," Catherine gently interrupted. "I'm here. We're all safe." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the crackling of the fireplace. "I found the letters," Catherine finally said, "in the attic, the ones I sent after our separation." Richard seemed genuinely surprised. What letters? I wrote to you for months after leaving Aspen, she explained, trying to explain my side, asking for a chance to talk. When you never replied, I thought you were unwavering in your decision. I never received any letters from you, he assured, her confusion evident on his face. Gregory must have intercepted them, Catherine concluded, just like he intercepted the test results confirming my pregnancy, which I faxed to your office. My God, murmured Richard, running a hand over his face. All these years and lost because of a man consumed by jealousy and obsession. We can't get that time back, Catherine said softly, but we can decide what to do with the time we have now. Richard reached out, lightly touching the bandage on her arm. I almost lost you twice. I don't want to risk a third time. Catherine felt her heart race at his closeness, at the intensity of his gaze. Richard, I know it's soon, he interrupted, gently placing a finger on her lips. I know there's so much to rebuild, so much trust to restore. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, I'm just asking for a chance for us. Catherine thought about the past days, weeks, years, the hatred she'd nurtured, the resentment she'd carried, the wall she'd built around her heart to never be hurt like that again. And she thought of the triplets, how their faces lit up when their father entered the room, how they seemed more complete, happier in these few days with him. One step at a time, she finally replied, allowing herself a small smile. Starting with this. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him softly. A hesitant, tentative kiss, like a first kiss, yet filled with history, memories, and future possibilities. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, a mix of relief and hope in their eyes. I think that's a good start, Richard murmured, holding her hands in his. A very good start, Catherine agreed. 6 months later, life had found a new rhythm. Richard's mansion, once too silent and formal, now overflowed with life and laughter. Catherine and the triplets had moved in permanently after weeks of trial, runs to see if living together would work. Harrington Construction, after a complete restructuring and audit, was slowly regaining its stability. Richard had rediscovered his passion for work, especially after incorporating Catherine's innovative ideas. She now served as an informal consultant. Gregory, physically recovered, awaited trial on multiple charges from the prison where he'd remained for a long time. Most of the embezzled money had been recovered, and a deal with investors had saved the Sunrise project. The triplets thrived in their new family dynamic. Brandon had discovered a passion for horseback riding, quickly learning the art of equitation from his father. Benjamin had turned a corner of the library into his lab for small science experiments, while Brody took piano lessons on the magnificent instrument in the music room, silent for years. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as the first leaves began to turn gold, Catherine found Richard on the porch, watching the boys play in the garden under Mrs. Margaret's watchful eye. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, joining him. "How life can change completely in so little time," he replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "A year ago I was alone in this huge house, buried in work, believing I'd never have a real family. And now we've got 3 little hurricanes wrecking all peace and order," she teased, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world," Richard finished, kissing the top of her head. Catherine smiled, her hand instinctively settling over the small curve just beginning to form on her belly, a secret she'd share with him later, when the time was right. The mistakes of the past couldn't be undone. The scars would remain, as reminders of lessons learned. But there, watching their children play in the garden they'd once dreamed of together, Catherine and Richard had finally found their way back to each other. Not as they once were, but as the stronger, wiser people they'd become during their years apart. Life doesn't always offer second chances, but when it does, it's up to us to find the courage to take them, the forgiveness to allow new beginnings, and the wisdom to cherish every moment of the precious time we're given. The end of the story. Dear listener, if this tale of forgiveness and new beginnings touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories. Tell us in the comments, do you believe true love always deserves a second chance?